The Case of Paula Ortega. In early 2023, the city of Sangolquí in Ecuador's Pichincha region was rocked by a tragic incident. It wasn't just the brutality of the crime that shocked the community, but its motive, a mere $600 theft. Could the life of 37-year-old Paula Ortega Alcocer really be valued at just $600? Born in March 1986, Paula was the second child in a large family. She excelled at Dario Figueroa Lara School and later attended the Polytechnic University, where she developed a keen interest in the hospitality industry. After her studies, Paula actively contributed to the growth of her family's business, which specialized in party goods manufacturing. The Ortega Alcocer family was well-to-do and renowned in Sangolquí and neighboring Ecuadorian towns. Paula's father, in his youth, began building a business supplying party goods across Ecuador. The venture became quite successful, enabling him to start his own production of balloons, piñatas, and other festive paraphernalia. This expansion led to the opening of several stores. The Alcocer family's party shops were located not only in Sangolquí, but also in Ecuador's capital, Quito. Each family member played a role in the development and maintenance of their enterprise. The father expanded the main production line, opening new workshops for balloons, garlands, caps, and various party items. Each of the three children managed a store, tailoring it to their vision. Paula's entrepreneurial spirit led her beyond just managing a store. She organized a party planning service within the company, which turned out to be a great success. It seemed Paula had found her calling, bringing joy to people, which made her truly happy. While the business ventures of the Ortega family flourished for a long time, unfortunately, Paula Ortega's personal life was not as successful. Despite her youthful and joyous demeanor, she faced significant hardships in her private life. Paula's first marriage to Carlos Pedro turned out to be unhappy. After the birth of their daughter, Carlos developed an alcohol addiction. He began disappearing from home and stealing money from Paula's store. His infidelity was the last straw, leading Paula to end the marriage and find herself alone with her daughter. This period was particularly challenging for Paula, as she lost hope in finding personal happiness. However, the psychological support of her family and her passion for her work helped her regain a sense of normalcy in her life. A decade later, Paula met Christian Diego. A tall, dark-haired, and handsome man, Christian was 4 years younger than Paula. Having lost faith in finding a worthy partner, Paula was cautious with the persistent young suitor. Christian proved to be calm and reliable, quickly bonding with Paula's daughter, which greatly impressed Paula. After 2 years of relationship, her heart warmed to him, leading to a beautiful wedding ceremony. Christian embraced Paula's daughter as his own, and they soon welcomed another daughter, Maria. Christian and Paula spent 5 years together, with Christian fully integrating into Paula's father's company. He was entrusted with finding locations for new stores, which often kept him away from home. Coming from a modest working-class family, Christian had always dreamed of owning a large business. Unfortunately, some people can conceal their dark sides so well that one might live for years alongside ruthless criminals without suspecting a thing. However, the truth eventually comes to light when evil erupts in the most unexpected ways. Paula Ortega and her husband, Christian, appeared to be the epitome of a happy, successful couple to their family, friends, and neighbors. However, this perception was only surface deep. In 2000, Paula's father passed away after a long illness. His death not only devastated the family, but also turned their business upside down. Christian, driven by a desire for power and the wealth it brought, eagerly sought to take Paula's father's place in the business. However, his lack of skill led to one failed deal after another. As a result, Christian began to vent his frustration on his family. Initially in secret, but later openly, he began to abandon his family, indulging in a life of debauchery. Women and alcohol became his escape into a world of pleasure and recklessness. With Paula's father no longer there to restrain him, Christian's true nature began to surface. Having already experienced a traumatic marriage, Paula refused to endure this behavior again. The couple's home became a battleground of endless scandals, revealing Christian's true nature as an ambitious egotist, craving only power and unquestioned obedience. After a particularly nasty argument, Paula secretly filed for divorce, fearing her husband's reaction. The news of this drastically changed Christian's behavior. Unwilling to lose his place in the successful family, he stopped his outrageous conduct and appeared to transform for the better. He expressed remorse, claiming to be caught up in a whirlwind of confusion, and professed his love and value for his family. His eloquence persuaded Paula. Not wanting to be alone again, she gave him a second chance. In a gesture of reconciliation, Christian suggested organizing a romantic dinner at their home. Paula agreed. She sent their daughters to her parents' house and began preparing for the evening. Inside, she was aflutter with excitement. Deep down, she still dreamed of a happy, strong family and was doing everything she could to preserve it. The evening at the Ortega home was one of celebration and comfort. The living room was lit up with festive garlands, and the dining table was warmly illuminated by the yellow glow of candles. Christian uncorked a bottle of dry white wine while Paula served a hot meal. The night could have been genuinely reconciliatory, had it not been for a sudden proposal from Christian that disrupted the peace. Christian, a co-owner of the Alcozar company, revealed to his wife a significant misstep. In his pursuit to replace Paula's father and gain full control, he had made a costly mistake in an important tender, leading to substantial losses for the company. Now, the firm desperately needed a new investor, implying that a part of the company would officially change hands. Paula was adamantly against this, believing her father's business should remain a family affair. Despite Christian's persuasion, she stood her ground, infuriating him. He had already found an investor and was eager to complete the deal without complications. Their dinner, and by extension their relationship, soured. January 2nd, 2023, seemed like any other day. Paula took her younger daughter to the playroom before heading to her shop for work. She had a large order to prepare, involving assembling balloon fountains and party decorations for a themed event. During her lunch break, 2 men knocked on the shop's door. Although closed, Paula opened it, expecting a courier to pick up the balloon bouquets. The men, slim and dressed identically as if they were twins, startled her with their dark hoodies. They lingered, scanning the shop before splitting up. As Paula called out to them, stating the shop was closed for lunch, they cornered her against the wall. The tension of this silent scene was broken by a knock on the glass door. The men hastily exited the shop. A smiling young courier arrived, unwittingly rescuing Paula from the unknown assailants. Shaken, Paula handed over the package, closed the shop, and with trembling hands, called her mother. She was visibly frightened, a sentiment she expressed over the phone. Paula's mother suggested reporting the unsettling incident at her shop to the police, but Paula declined, attributing her reaction to mere fright since nothing harmful had actually occurred. She didn't reopen her shop that day, her thoughts consumed by Christian's actions and the identity and motives of the 2 mysterious men. Seeking solace, Paula decided to take a stroll through the city. She stopped at a nearby cafe for some coffee, walked through the park to breathe in the fresh air, and then visited her sister. Over cups of fragrant tea, they engaged in a heart-to-heart conversation. Overwhelmed by the day's shocking events, Paula confided in her sister not only about the scary encounter at her shop, but also about the difficulties in her marriage. She shared how Christian had drastically changed after her father's passing, indulging in alcohol and openly being unfaithful. Paula chose not to mention his proposal about merging the company with a new investor, as she habitually kept her personal struggles to herself. But that day, her emotions overpowered her pride and shame over tolerating such demeaning treatment. He's a peculiar being. My sister was lively, happy, cheerful, enterprising, hardworking, an extremely gentle and kind mother. She should have been receiving energy from him, Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, would later say. Paula spoke of her long-term life plans, her desire for her daughters to grow up and become professionals, and her intention to continue her business. She was selfless and tirelessly hardworking, Adriana recalled. After her emotional talk with her sister, Paula headed home. A phone call from Christian interrupted her. He was picking up their daughter from the playroom and would come to the shop to pick her up as well. His hurried speech was interspersed with children's voices. Paula didn't get a chance to tell him about the frightening incident at her shop, especially since she suspected him to be involved. Reluctantly, Paula returned to work, once again prioritizing her family's well-being over her own. She didn't have to wait long. Christian arrived alone, explaining that their daughter had wanted to go home, and he couldn't deny his little princess. He informed Paula that the girls were at home and eagerly waiting for hamburgers for dinner. In what has become a modern family tradition, Christian took Paula not to the nearest fast food joint, but to a restaurant courtyard at a shopping center, several blocks from their home. Parking the car beside a secluded wall and locking it securely, he left Paula inside to collect their order. Relaxing in the passenger seat after a taxing day, Paula closed her eyes, unaware of the impending danger. Shortly, she recognized two familiar figures near the car, talking loudly and circling the vehicle. Recognizing them as the unexpected visitors from her shop, Paula tried to stay calm, trusting that the car was secure and Christian would return soon. Suddenly, the car's lights flashed and the door locks disengaged. In a panic, Paula scrambled to the back seat, hiding between the seats and covering her head with her arms, but she was trapped with no escape. One intruder casually got into the driver's seat while the other joined him in the back, pinning Paula down even more. She felt something warm trickling down her arm before darkness enveloped her. Paula sustained 11 knife wounds to her neck and 2 to her face. After the brutal attack, the assailants fled the scene, leaving Paula alone and gravely injured. Christian returned just 7 minutes later to a horrific sight. The car's interior was drenched in blood. Frantically, he called emergency services, but struggled to clearly communicate the situation and give emergency coordinates. He then called Paula's mother to report the attack before driving to the hospital himself. Tragically, Paula succumbed to her injuries in the emergency room, passing away before receiving necessary medical attention. Christian, overwhelmed by grief and shock at the loss of his wife, reacted with loud cries and throwing chairs in the waiting room. The sudden violent end of Paula Ortega left a community in shock and a family in profound grief, raising questions about the motive and identity of the attackers. The initial theory of the prosecution was a violent end inflicted during a robbery. It was later discovered that $600 and a gold necklace were missing from Paula's purse. This began an investigation. The prosecution's theory was confirmed when footage from city cameras showed 2 unknown men who had visited Paula's store earlier that day in the vicinity. Both were in hoodies, making it impossible to create a clear image of their faces, and their vague descriptions provided no clarity. 2 months after the tragic event, Paula's family demanded justice, but the investigation was at a standstill. A turning point came when Adriana Ortega, Paula's sister, gave testimony casting doubt on Christian's innocence. She informed the investigators about a conversation she had with Paula on the day of the incident. Adriana also mentioned that Christian regularly committed infidelity and domestic violence against Paula, who was contemplating divorce. This provided a perfect motive, as Christian, driven by ambition, could not afford to lose his wealth and status in the event of a divorce. The prosecution investigated this angle. During a search of their home, incriminating messages were found on Christian's phone, indicating multiple affairs and turbulent marital relations. A critical piece of evidence was documentation prepared for the transfer of the company to a private individual, which Paula had refused to sign. Following these revelations, the incident was investigated as a suspected homicide, as the prosecution continued to gather information implicating Christian Diego. New evidence emerged, unraveling the complex web of the couple's relationship. 2 weeks after the incident, we found out he transferred $2,000 to an unknown woman's account, said Adriana, Paula's sister, adding another layer of suspicion to the already convoluted case. The most shocking aspect, as claimed by relatives, was that Christian made a payment using Paula's account while she was dying from her injuries. Instead of immediately helping his gravely wounded wife, Christian seemingly bided his time. Investigations confirmed this information. The identity of the woman who received the transfer from Christian that day was established as 28-year-old Laura Castillo. Urgently summoned for questioning, she revealed that she had noticed her bank card missing a couple of days earlier, but didn't think much of it, as her brother often used her card. The electronic payment records showed a transfer of $2,000 from Christian on January 2nd at 20:05. However, Laura denied any acquaintance with Christian. Her solid alibi at the time of the incident absolved her of any involvement. She was released, and the investigation hit a dead end again. Days later, Laura returned to the police, stating her brother had returned the bank card, as she had suspected. She provided a full description of her brother's appearance, which matched one of the criminals caught on surveillance cameras near the car. In the chaos of fleeing the crime scene, one attacker forgot to pull up his hood. The identities of Byron and Mortines Castillo, two repeat offenders with a substantial criminal history, were established. The brothers were apprehended. But what could possibly link two seasoned criminals to a seemingly respectable and successful family man? Further investigation revealed that the attacks on Paula had been carried out repeatedly by the Castillo brothers. But why were these repeat offenders targeting this young woman? On December 8, 2022, Paula Ortega faced a harrowing incident at a gas station when her car was stolen. Distracted by a young man, his accomplice quickly jumped behind the wheel and sped off. Fortunately, her daughters weren't in the car that day. Surveillance footage identified the two familiar culprits. Coincidentally, on the day of the theft, Paula unknowingly came face to face with her future assailant. However, the car theft case took an unexpected turn when Christian intervened, claiming the thieves had contacted him. He met with them and retrieved all of Paula's personal belongings, including her wallet. This development cast further doubt on Christian's innocence. Seasoned investigators were puzzled by the widower's boldness in shielding the criminals. Surveillance cameras played a crucial role in identifying the carjackers. As Christian realized he was under suspicion, he concocted a new defense narrative involving extortion by two criminal brothers demanding a large sum of money. But before he could deploy his version of events, the police executed a swift interrogation strategy. Separating the suspects and suggesting one had confessed, they obtained a confession from Martin Castillo. He admitted that more than 2 months earlier, Christian had paid them $2,000 to murder his wife, promising another $2,000 after the deed. During a reenactment, Martin demonstrated how he inflicted 11 fatal knife wounds on the terrified woman. Realizing the crime was uncovered, he remorselessly divulged all details of their arrangement with Christian. Martin revealed that the car theft and the attack on Paula's shop were also parts of Christian's plan to pressure her. By chance, Paula lived a few hours longer than intended. On November 29, 2023, all three suspects appeared in court. The prosecution presented a comprehensive picture of the murder day, pieced together from various sources. Videos from surveillance cameras in the area where Christian parked the car, subjected to audio and video forensic analysis, unveiled a chilling, soul-freezing narrative. In chilling surveillance footage, Christian Diego is seen exiting his car and heading towards a shopping center elevator. Moments later, he remotely unlocks his car from half a block away, allowing two assailants to enter the vehicle and attack Paula. The prosecutor's report noted Christian's odd behavior post-attack, repeatedly looking back, approaching the car, pausing, returning, pacing back and forth, and making phone calls. Surprisingly, upon finding his wife bleeding profusely, he showed no shock or urgency to help her, instead driving her to a distant hospital. Christian's actions, meticulously reconstructed from surveillance videos, particularly in the first 4 minutes after Paula's attack, were cold and calculating. As she bled in the car but was still alive, Christian, standing nearby, callously transferred money to his accomplices for the assault. Paula's family lawyers urged the court to consider these videos as aggravating factors in the crime. The reconstructed sequence of events presented in court proves the crime was premeditated. Hours before the attack, around 1:30 p.m., two individuals entered Paula's store, dropped off nearby by Christian. This implies the crime was intended to occur earlier, during the lunchtime closure, when Paula was alone. Prosecutor Marlon Calderon highlighted inconsistencies. How did the assailants know the couple would be at the eatery if they weren't tailing them? Yet they arrived on time to commit the crime. Christian's actions, not fully raising the car window, unlocking the doors near the eatery, his 1,000 times pacing before aiding his wife, phone calls, and not seeking immediate medical attention at a nearby clinic are key evidence for charging him with orchestrating the femicide. Femicide, defined as the intentional murder of a woman simply because she is a woman, was a central theme in the trial of Christian and Paula Ortega's troubled relationship. Shockingly present in today's society, this hate crime was exemplified through Christian's younger age, which seemed to fuel his contempt and abuse towards Paula. Despite her success, Paula lived in a metaphorical golden cage, masking and enabling her husband's tyrannical behavior, allowing him to assert dominance. Years of silence culminated in Christian's sinister plot to seize control of Paula's thriving party empire and gain sole guardianship of their daughter, Maria. Testimonies from over 10 witnesses, including neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, alongside thorough examination of internal and external family communications, revealed Christian's true motives and objectives. Without legal signing rights, he sought to coerce Paula into transferring her company shares. However, his plan failed. Christian didn't physically harm Paula but inflicted severe psychological abuse, artfully concealed under the guise of a perfect family life. According to the Prosecutor General's report, video evidence led to Christian's preventive isolation as the crime's orchestrator. This measure isn't an arrest but a strategy to neutralize a societal threat. Following this action, Christian planned to flee. In the high-profile case against Christian Diego, accused of orchestrating his wife's demise, his defense team worked tirelessly to portray him as a victim. However, they were unable to refute crucial evidence like surveillance footage and falsified company transfer documents. Desperate, the defense then attempted to depict the accused as suffering from a mental disorder, citing episodes of sudden rage. Multiple psychiatrists evaluated Christian, but he was declared competent. His defense counsel, realizing the gravity of the situation, advised Christian to flee the country, asking if his passport was ready and suggesting he buy a ticket to Panama for the next day. However, this plan to escape justice failed. Christian's search for Central American flight tickets raised alarm bells with the authorities. The prosecutor swiftly ordered an 8-hour detainment of Christian Diego, followed by charges and the disclosure of case details to a judge specializing in domestic violence cases. Pending trial, the suspect was held in preliminary detention, pursued as the alleged mastermind behind the heinous act that left 2 young children motherless and an entire family grieving an irreplaceable loss. The Ortega family demands justice for this atrocious crime, emphasizing the devastating impact on the children and their irreplaceable loss. In a case that gripped public attention, the jury concluded that Christian and his 2 accomplices were guilty of a meticulously planned, intentional act of extreme brutality. The unremorseful Christian and his associates were sentenced to 26 years in prison. The municipal authorities of Rumiñahui expressed their solidarity with the tragic loss of Paula Alcocer. The institution extends its deepest sympathies to the family and friends affected by this incident. The unfortunate demise of this esteemed businesswoman, friend, mother, and wife, who contributed significantly to the canton's development and brought prosperity to those in her circle, is deeply mourned, their statement read. Paula's case emerged as a prominent instance of violence against women, following the Latin American Association for Alternative Development's report of 332 fatalities due to gender-based violence in 2022. The Beverly Liot case, madness by inheritance, when a favorite son becomes an executioner. Genetics, unfortunately, is inextricably linked to many diseases that are inherited. These include some mental disorders. However, even an existing predisposition is only a risk and probability, but not a guarantee that the child will inherit this or that ailment. Naturally, every parent hopes that the children will take from him only the best, and diseases will bypass offspring. Many experts say that there are no specific genes for the transmission of mental illness. That is, no one gene is necessary or sufficient to provoke the disease. Nevertheless, mental illness tends to run in families. This is exactly the problem faced by our heroine today, Beverly Liot, who sincerely believed that her children would not be affected by such an affliction. And indeed, Beverly's daughter grew up a perfectly healthy and balanced woman, but the son, apparently, took a double blow in which he blamed solely on his mother. It should be noted that the presence of a mental disorder did not affect the intelligence of this guy. On the contrary, he was very clever and calculating, from which the atrocities committed by him look even more sickeningly creepy. Who is Beverly Liot? Beverly Liot was born on the 1st of October 1956 in the capital of Colorado, a picturesque metropolis called Denver. She was raised with her older brother Stephen and sister Martha in an ordinary family of Barbara and Edwin Liot, who lived all their lives in their hometown, almost never leaving its boundaries. After graduating from high school, Beverly went to a local college, but here she could not go to university for a variety of reasons, partly related to her health. In her youth, the girl worked as a salesman, but after she married at the age of 26 and gave birth to 2 children, she devoted herself to her family for many years and was exclusively engaged in raising heirs and creating a home. In 1988, Beverly had a long-awaited firstborn son, Ari, and a few years later, a daughter, Libby, was born. The young woman literally did not care about her heirs and lived for them. However, in the second half of the 90s, her marriage broke up. The husband left the family, moved to another state, and was no longer interested in the fate of his ex-wife and did not take any part in the lives of children. Beverly was forced to take 2 jobs at once, but thanks to her diligence and determination, the family of 3 did not need anything. She and her children moved to the suburbs of Denver, a small and relatively young, founded in 2001 town centennial, where they rented a cozy, spacious house. In the mid-2000s, Beverly, on one of the dating sites, met a man named Seth Missy, with whom they had a correspondence, which grew into a romantic relationship. It was he who inspired her lover to finally fulfill her dream and pursue higher education. Liot chose medical school because she always dreamed of helping other people and felt that in this lies her calling. At that time, she was already over 50 years old, and in the group she was twice as old as her fellow students. However, she easily found a common language with them and is remembered by all as sociable, attentive, and responsible miniature brunette who was nicknamed Caring Angel. Beverly and Seth's romance lasted about 5 years before the couple decided to officially legalize their relationship. For both of them, the step was a serious one, but they were ready for it. Beverly was happy, as she finally had a college degree, had a better paying job, and was about to marry the man she loved. Her children were old enough by then to be on their own, but her son Ari was a source of genuine anxiety and apprehension, and there were a number of good reasons for that. A hereditary disease. There was a sensitive issue in the Liot family that they tried hard to hide from others and never discussed with outsiders. The fact that Beverly and her sister Martha from an early age suffered from bipolar affective disorder, which is characterized by frequent changes in mood phases, from manic to depressive. From time to time, the disorder was exacerbated. But if Martha experienced minor discomfort associated with this disorder, and the prescribed medication quickly gave positive results, Beverly sometimes needed hospital treatment because she was on the verge of voluntarily taking her own life. It was for this reason that she was unable to go to university in her time, and for the same reason the marriage with the father of her children broke up. It is also worth noting that her mother, Barbara too, was subject to prolonged depression, but she faced this problem in the 40s, and then the woman no one in time did not provide qualified help, and so she was forced to fight her illness on her own for almost all her life. Beverly was sure that the mental disorder in their family is transmitted exclusively through the female line, because the disease manifested itself in her mother, her and her sister, while her brother Stephen remained completely normal. In this regard, Beverly feared for the health of her daughter Libby, but just the daughter of the disease bypassed, hitting with redoubled force on Ari, the special child. From early childhood, Ari was a rather strange, withdrawn boy prone to tantrums. At the age of 5, he was diagnosed with autism, and later a whole host of other mental disorders and abnormalities were added. He could withdraw into himself, and completely abstracted from what was going on around him. But such states, as a rule, alternated with attacks of aggression. Despite his mental problems, Ari went to a normal high school, where he studied quite well. Particularly easy to give him the exact sciences. In particular, he was fond of chemistry and physics. The boy easily solved complex problems, and most calculations were made in his mind. His intelligence was above average, but his social and communication skills were practically absent. Classmates avoided the strange and unsociable peer or simply mocked him. Ari had no friends at all, was not eager to learn about the world around him, was aggressive and violent, which manifested itself in cruelty to animals and attacks on other children. The boy was repeatedly hospitalized and prescribed medication to correct his condition, but at home he usually stopped taking the prescribed medication and soon returned to his previous state. His parents tried to control him to take the necessary pills, but the older he got, the more difficult it was to do so. He did not know how to ask or talk calmly, and he always got what he wanted with tantrums. The boy could shut himself in and not talk to anyone for weeks, but could talk for hours to himself or to some imaginary interlocutor. In periods of aggravation, he became dangerous to others, and his relatives sometimes insisted on his compulsory hospitalization. A dangerous teenager. As a teenager, Ari learned that his mother, aunt, and grandmother also suffered from mental health problems, and his mother had to be hospitalized at times. During that period, Ari literally hated his mother and blamed her for all of his troubles. He believed that she had awarded him with a disease that was ruining his life. The young man became increasingly uncontrollable. He threatened his loved ones with violence and constantly wondered why his own sister, family curse, bypassed. Being with him under the same roof was becoming unsafe, and the first could not stand the head of the family. He filed for divorce and literally escaped. Despite his diagnosis, Ari was easily able to enter the university, receiving a high passing score. However, the guy was expelled in his first year after he brought a homemade firearm to the institution and threatened a fellow student with death. At that time, he was arrested for the first time, but only got off with an educational talk, confiscation of the weapon, and expulsion from the university. About a year later, the police were contacted by Beverly and asked to come to their home immediately to subdue her son, who was threatening to kill her and her daughter, and appeared to be very serious. But the police handed the violent young man into the hands of psychiatrists, and those, after a short treatment in the hospital, released him home, prescribing medication, which Ari, of course, did not take. Hateful stepfather. Ari was 18 years old when Beverly met Seth and began dating him. Soon the couple decided to live together, but Ari, from the very beginning, took his mother's new chosen one in the bayonet. He tried in every possible way to get him out of the house, threatened, scandalized, and even started fights. The appearance of another man in the house young man perceived as a personal insult and betrayal by his mother. Seth, as best he could, tried to support his beloved. He looked for specialists who could help the young man, paid for his treatment in clinics, but the more he tried, the more Ari hated him. The very thought of this man becoming his stepfather and part of their family frightened and depressed Ari, making him aggressive and dangerous. Seth Missy repeatedly told his wife that her son was old enough to live on his own. He could study or work and be like everyone else if he took his medication properly. Beverly Liot herself was well aware of this, but she loved her son and could not leave him or kick him out, so she continued to endanger her own life. Obsession with guns. As time went on, the young man's hobbies became more and more bizarre, sophisticated, and dangerous. He had a weakness for weapons, and to be more precise, was literally obsessed with them. In the basement of his own house, he collected homemade firearms literally from improvised materials, as they say, on his knees, which once again proved that the guy was very smart, clever, and enterprising. But Ari was not limited to one weapon and got the idea to create an explosive device. He found all the information he was interested in on the internet, bought or ordered the components he needed, and the substances he couldn't get. He decided to synthesize at home himself, using his deep knowledge of chemistry. The mother found her son in the backyard of the house. Beverly was suspicious, and since her son did not answer questions and behaved strangely, she immediately called the police. As it turned out, she did it in time, because during the search, the police found in the house almost ready bomb. In addition, they found and confiscated a modified rifle, several pistols assembled from parts of different models, a silencer, and a lot of spare parts for weapons. When Ari's computer search history for the past few months was reviewed and studied, the FBI became seriously interested in the young man, as they suspected that he was preparing a large-scale crime. In addition, In Ari's room on the shelves were numerous jars of poisonous substances, including arsenic and potassium cyanide. He himself could not clearly explain why he had purchased them. The young man was arrested the same day, but was only charged with a misdemeanor possession of weapons and careless handling of dangerous chemicals that could cause death or serious injury. But Ari pleaded guilty, cooperated with the investigation, and received only a 1-year suspended sentence, after which he returned to his home, where he again began to terrorize his mother, sister, and Seth. The threat of reprisals and the indifference of the medical profession. After his arrest and suspended sentence, Ari literally went mad with anger and hatred. Not a day went by that he didn't threaten to kill his family in their sleep or burn down their house after locking everyone in there. Then Ari was hospitalized again and spent about 3 months in the walls of a psychiatric hospital. Doctors, in addition to earlier diagnoses, revealed signs of schizophrenia and acute psychosis in the young man. After another course of treatment, the young man became quiet for a while and went into himself again. He did not talk to anyone, spent most of his time in his room at his computer, and seemed to take his prescribed medication faithfully. But only a month later, he had another breakdown, which was triggered by the news of his mother and Seth's upcoming wedding. Ari also overheard Ari talking about his mother and stepfather, planning to buy their own house in another state, move there, and start their lives over. Libby's sister had already moved out with her boyfriend, which meant Ari would be on his own. The 25-year-old guy was not happy about it. The young man literally went crazy. He threw his mother a tantrum, screamed, waved a knife in front of her, threatened to kill her and make sure that the body would never be found. Beverly immediately called the psychiatric hospital, told them everything, and asked for her son to be forcibly hospitalized again. But the attending physician was dismissive of her request, believing that there was no reason to do so, and that the last course of treatment had yielded positive results, so that Ari, in his opinion, did not pose a threat to others. That same evening, Beverly had one last conversation with Seth, who was in another city for work, and was unable to come to her immediately. Beverly's mysterious disappearance. On the 14th of October 2012, less than 2 weeks after the woman celebrated her 56th birthday, she mysteriously disappeared. She failed to turn up for hospital duty that day, something that had never happened before. Colleagues were the first to sound the alarm. After failing to call his lover and receiving no response to his numerous messages, Seth dialed Libby's number to find out when she had last spoken to her mother. As it turned out, Libby had also been trying to call her unsuccessfully since morning. Seth called the house phone, and what he heard horrified him. The phone was picked up by Ari, who unsuccessfully tried to copy his mother's voice, pretending to be her and claiming that she was fine. Seth immediately contacted the police and asked them to send a unit to their home as soon as possible. However, when the police arrived, they found that no one was home, and they could not find a good reason to break in at that time. Therefore, the only attempts made that day were to trace Beverly's phone signal and check her bank card activity. Since Beverly's car was also missing, it was put on a statewide manhunt. And it was the vehicle that led to a lead just 2 days later, when a patrolman spotted it in a Denver suburb and decided to check the paperwork and see if it was the right car. A creepy find in the boot. The car seemed strange to the police officer even before he checked the license plate number and made sure it belonged to the missing woman. When the last doubts were gone, the police officer approached the driver and asked for identification. The driver was a young man with long hair that partially covered his face. He was visibly nervous, and when he was asked to show his documents again, he simply pushed the throttle to the floor, sped off, and sped down the road at full speed. The police officer began to chase the fugitive and radioed for backup. But just a couple of minutes later, while trying to make a sharp turn at high speed, the car skidded, went off the road, and hit a tree. The driver was wearing a seatbelt, and the airbags deployed, leaving him unharmed. Ari tried to run away, but was thrown to the ground by police officers as soon as he left the vehicle. On examining the vehicle, the police found several large, sealed plastic containers in the boot of the vehicle, which they opened to their shock and horror. Inside were fragments of a dismembered female body, covered with a strange-smelling, murky liquid. The interrogation and the killer's attempts to evade responsibility. Once Ari was brought to the station for questioning, he stated that he had schizophrenia, autism, psychosis, and bipolar affective disorder, as his psychiatrist could confirm. He also added that he was unable to distinguish between right and wrong because of his diagnoses, so he did not know what he was doing. He then asked whether he would be tried if his diagnoses were confirmed and what punishment he would face. Ari categorically refused to plead guilty. During interrogations, he would call himself a god or claim that he was possessed by demons and needed the help of an exorcist. At times, Ari's speech became incoherent, as if he began to talk to an invisible interlocutor, completely ignoring the police. The psychiatric examination confirmed that the accused indeed suffers from a number of mental disorders, but at the same time, it was proved that he is quite able to give an account of his actions. Also during the interrogations, the psychiatrist who observed the guy's behavior concluded that even when talking to himself, he always listened attentively to what was being said to him and what questions were being asked. This was evident from his reactions, clarifications, and sudden mood swings. The main reason why Ari was so vividly and demonstratively showing his insanity was an attempt to avoid severe punishment and minimize his responsibility before the law. He was clever and intelligent enough, so he tried to confuse the investigation and convince others of his insanity. The investigation and the unexpected results of the search. Despite the fact that from the very beginning, no one doubted that Ari had committed a terrible crime, his guilt had to be proved, and this required hard evidence. It was decided to start with a search in their family home, where, as expected, the murder took place. There, the police found washed-up traces of blood on the kitchen floor, in the corridor, and in the bathroom. In the dishwasher lay a bloody hacksaw, which the young man had apparently used to cut up his mother's body. The place for this gruesome act was the bathtub, which had numerous jagged chips on its edges. The expert examination showed that Beverly was poisoned with potassium cyanide, and after her death, her body was dismembered with a hacksaw and packed into containers. Vials with the said poisonous substance were found in the kitchen, in Ari's room, as well as in the basement of the house, where the guy had a kind of chemical laboratory. In addition, in his bedroom, under the bed was found the corpse of Beverly's favorite cat, which was also poisoned with poison. This suggested that the perpetrator first practiced on the animal before killing the mother. By the way, remember the strange liquid in which the fragments of the dismembered body were placed? As it turned out, it had a special chemical composition which is able to accelerate the process of decomposition of tissue. Ari found the recipe on the internet and decided to literally dissolve the corpse and hide the bones in the mountains so that they would never be found. A picture of the crime and the killer's justification. Based on all the evidence found, the following picture of the massacre emerged. On the eve of the tragedy, Ari had a big row with his mother and threatened to kill her again. He was so convincing that Beverly, seriously afraid for her life, called her son's psychiatrist with a request to immediately hospitalize him. However, the specialist ignored the request, believing that his patient was not dangerous to others. In the evening, the young man, having previously tested the effects of the poison on a cat, poisoned his mother, took her body to the bathroom, and began to cut it up with a hacksaw. How he got his mother to take potassium cyanide remains a mystery to this day. It probably took Ari all night to complete the gruesome job because in the morning, when Seth called the house phone, the perpetrator was still in the house. Ari then carelessly cleaned up the blood, stuffed the saw into the dishwasher, and packed the body into several containers filled with chemicals. He took the containers to the boot of his mother's car, which he used to leave the house. The further events are already known to you. When this version was presented to the defendant, supported by hard evidence, he suddenly began to justify himself and change his testimony. Ari stated that his mother took her own life by taking the poison voluntarily, and he only found her lifeless body. According to the guy, he was greatly afraid that he would be left without means of subsistence, as he himself did not work and lived at her expense. Then he decided to get rid of the body so that she would be considered missing. According to his plan, he himself was to remain living in the house and could continue to use the deceased's bank cards and accounts. The young man's story sounded wild and crazy. There was no doubt in anyone's mind that he was mentally ill, but it was also obvious that he had carefully planned the crime in advance. It was not a temporary insanity, a state of affect, or a fit of aggression. He had thought out every step and acted accordingly to the plan. One of the main evidences that the crime was pre-planned was Ari's possession of chemicals accelerating decomposition of the body, which he had purchased in advance. Moreover, according to his search history, he had studied them in detail months before the crime, the trial, and sentence. As I have already said, the psychiatric examination confirmed Ari's diagnoses, but the experts gave an unequivocal conclusion that he was aware of his actions and had carefully prepared in advance for the massacre of his mother. He himself continued to insist on his insanity, although he realized that it was useless to feign insanity. The trial took place in November of the same year, a month and a half after the crime that shook the entire state. Lawyers desperately tried to prove that the defendant cannot be criminally responsible because of his illness and needs treatment. Ari himself claimed that his mother hated him, so passed the hereditary disease to him, while his sister was completely normal. He also called himself a victim of crazy Beverly and blamed his parent for all his troubles. Seth appeared in court as a witness and said that his late lover, and he himself, frankly afraid of Ari because they did not know what to expect from him. He was incredibly cruel to others, showed sadistic tendencies, and refused to take prescribed medication to suppress outbursts of aggression. He also added that Beverly's fear for her son had transformed into her fear of her own son. The court found Ari Liot guilty of first-degree premeditated murder and sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of ever being eligible for parole. The jury unanimously found his actions to be cold-blooded and calculated. The 26-year-old defendant listened to his verdict in silence, his head down, and seemingly unconcerned. Libby Liot, after the trial, admitted that she believed her brother was 100% guilty of what he had done. But at the same time, she noted that, perhaps, the tragedy could have been avoided if the specialists to whom the family repeatedly turned for help conscientiously performed their duties and in time to respond to the alarming messages Beverly. As of today, Ari Liot is serving his life sentence in a Colorado state prison. All of his attempts to appeal and challenge the court's decision have been rejected. Inevitability. When one person goes missing, it's always a tragedy for their family. But imagine the horror that befalls the loved ones if an entire family disappears. And if there are children involved, the grief is indescribable. Matters concerning the life and health of children are always perceived with a special sensitivity. They are innocent from birth. Unfortunately, there are times when these little angels suffer and bear responsibilities just as adults do. A complicated situation unfolded in the fall of 2013 in Deltona, Florida, USA, involving the family of Yenia Suarez and Luis Toledo. The 28-year-old mother vanished along with her children, 9-year-old Thalia and 8-year-old Michael Otto. Law enforcement officers began the search and investigation into the disappearance immediately. However, the clues discovered soon left the seasoned officers astonished. What happened overnight from October 22nd to October 23rd is shrouded in mystery and defies all logic. Disappearance. The next morning, Felicita Perez, the mother of the main character, waited for her usual call. Yesenia called her every day between 8:30 and 9 a.m., but this time there was no call. The elderly woman grew concerned, as such behavior was out of character for her daughter. Over the next 2 hours, she tried to make contact, but all attempts were futile. The mobile phone of the person being called was turned off. Felicita then called the school where her grandchildren attended. However, the administration informed her that the children had not arrived for classes. The mother's concern grew. Around 11 a.m., she decided to visit Yesenia's home, but nobody answered the door. After this, the worried woman sought help from the police. The compelling arguments she presented convinced the officers to respond to the message. Upon arriving at Yesenia's residence, police officers began inspecting the house and the surrounding area. Soon after, 35-year-old Luis, the husband of the missing woman, arrived. He seemed surprised to find law enforcement at his home and initially expressed indignation. However, once he learned the reasons for their presence, he softened. During the conversation, the man mentioned that he last saw his wife and children the night before. After a minor argument, she packed some belongings and left, saying nothing to him. The family was on the verge of divorce, so after another quarrel, he spent the night in the car. By morning, the house was empty. Toledo stated that he was deeply saddened that after years together, his wife did not even bother to say goodbye. His words were credible. He also gave permission for a search. Inside the home, except for scattered children's toys, everything was orderly. No signs of forced entry or struggle were detected. It seemed quite possible that the young woman left at the first opportunity along with her children. Also missing were her second car, a 2013 Honda Accord, as well as her personal items, documents, and mobile phone. Nevertheless, there were elements that raised concerns. Firstly, Suarez was very close to her relatives. Therefore, she would not have kept them in the dark and would have informed them of her plans or current whereabouts. Secondly, a peculiar smell lingered in the house, especially strong in the bedroom, bathroom, and the hallway leading from it. At places, the smell of cleaning products mixed with the scent of vinegar. This led detectives to two conclusions. Either the homeowners were exceptionally clean, or someone was attempting to destroy evidence of a crime that had occurred there. Thirdly, Felicita's account raised suspicions. She had previously told the police that on October 22nd, a terrible argument occurred between Yesenia and Luis, during which he showed aggression and struck her daughter. Finally, neighbors of the couple, who had gathered at the arrival of the police, reported strange noises coming from the house under investigation. Witnesses explained that they heard something resembling a scream around 2 a.m., but did not attach any significance to it. Altercations among teenagers in this area were not uncommon. Therefore, only when law enforcement arrived did they realize that something extraordinary had happened. On the brink of collapse. Subsequent investigations shed light on the details of the argument mentioned by the mother of the missing woman and her children. Luis suspected his wife of infidelity and had installed a tracking program on her phone. This led him to discover an affair between Yesenia and her colleague, Kevin Dren. On October 22nd, the distraught husband confronted his wife at her workplace, publicly accused her of infidelity, and slapped her. He then declared he would not hinder the lovers further. During the conflict, one of the organization's employees called emergency services to report the incident. However, Toledo left the building before the police arrived. The officers interviewed Suarez, who admitted that she often experienced such uncontrollable behavior from her husband, but had never sought help. Her statements were documented and recorded. After work, Yesenia visited her mother's house, where her children were waiting. They had dinner together, after which Toledo called her. Felicita recounted hearing about their conversation. Luis apologized and pleaded not to press charges against him. He also warned that something unpleasant might happen if she did not comply with his demands. It turns out the protagonist of the story had decided to obtain a restraining order against her husband. But after the call, she changed her mind, explaining to her family that it would only make things worse. Late in the evening, Toledo came to his mother-in-law's house and spoke with the women. He was distraught, complaining that his marriage was falling apart. He expressed his love for his family and his desire not to lose them. Yesenia, however, was determined and declared that a divorce was imminent. After this, he left. To give him time to cool off and come to terms with the new reality, the woman initially decided to stay overnight at her parental home. Nevertheless, after meeting with her husband, she took the children and returned home. Unfortunately, this was the last time the mother saw her daughter and grandchildren. Arrest. Due to the incident at Suarez's office the day before and her subsequent disappearance, the police had solid grounds to arrest Luis. The man was shocked and appeared bewildered. At the station, he reiterated his version of the events that happened overnight. After arguing with his wife at her mother's house, he went to a neighbor's place, where he stayed until 1 a.m. He then decided to spend the night in his car to avoid further conflict. At 7 a.m., he returned home and found that no one was there. Despite this, the suspect remained calm and did not express any concern for the missing individuals.
He explained this by his confidence that they would soon return or make contact. He claimed Yesenia was not the kind of person who kept others regularly informed, and the current situation was just a foolish coincidence.
A love story. Yesenia and Luis met in 2009 during a street festival. They were immediately attracted to each other and quickly fell in love. However, their relationship was anything but harmonious. Everyone around them was convinced that the two were not suited for each other. Suarez had been through a failed marriage before. At 24, she found herself a single mother of 2 young children. Thus, she was determined to set up their lives in the most favorable way possible. She dreamed of providing them with a good education and a better future. To this end, she re-enrolled in college and took up a full-time job. Yesenia worked for an American canine detection service in Lake Mary, a company known for training dogs to work with military and police forces. Luis, in contrast to his partner, was older and just beginning to sort out his life. He had been convicted multiple times in the past and was a former member of the Latin Kings gang. Thanks to his disposition and well-honed fighting skills, he had once held a leading position within the group. However, after turning state's evidence and betraying his peers, he lost his former influence and respect. Therefore, Toledo left the gang, turned away from his criminal past, and enrolled in college for barber training. He even got baptized and started attending church. Luis emerged as a sociable and caring person who tried to help everyone. After meeting Yesenia, he transformed completely. He became a loving and tender partner to her and a caring stepfather to her children. All the neighbors spoke highly of him. They often saw him spending time with his family and playing with the kids in the yard. The young couple got married on the first day of 2011. Although their relationship was initially happy, over time everything changed. Respect and understanding faded away. Luis began to spend a lot of time on video games and neglected his family duties. It seemed all his attention had shifted to the virtual world. His wife repeatedly expressed her grievances, but the situation would only improve temporarily. Felicita often visited the couple since she lived just a few blocks away. Therefore, she was well aware of everything happening in her daughter's life. Gradually, the number of arguments in the family increased. Toledo genuinely did not understand what was expected of him and why they couldn't live as before. One day, he became so angry that he physically lashed out at his wife. After this, their marriage began to crumble. Eyewitnesses. After Luis was detained, detectives began interviewing relatives and acquaintances of the missing family. They also contacted Yesenia's lover, Kevin. He reported that he had spoken with her late on the evening of October 22nd. He called to check on her, concerned that she might be in trouble after the incident at work. During the conversation, Suarez seemed tense, but she assured him that everything was fine and that it would just take some time to settle down. Sometimes her voice sounded unclear, which made him think that she might have had a drink. Their conversation lasted about 5 minutes. At the end, Yesenia wished him a good night and said goodbye. It was clear that Kevin did not know where she was and was genuinely worried that something irreparable might have happened to her. Later, a call came into the police station from Jackson Titian, a neighbor of the suspect. The young man lived with his mother across the street and had inadvertently witnessed the events unfold. He reported that at 6 a.m., Louise came to him asking for help with a task. He needed to pick up a neighbor on his way back from Lake Mary, but he did not explain why. Meanwhile, Toledo got into Yesenia's car, leading the student to assume that her vehicle needed repair and they were heading to a garage. However, the reality was different from what he had imagined. They drove for about 30 minutes and then stopped in the parking lot of a large supermarket. Luis got out and started cleaning the interior of the car. Jackson noticed how thoroughly he wiped down the cabin, all the doors and windows, using a cleaning agent. Afterwards, he put the car mats, a rag, and gloves into a bag and then disposed of the bundle in a trash container. At that moment, the eyewitness did not understand what was happening and felt mixed emotions. He began to suspect that something serious had occurred the night before. Yet, on the other hand, if Toledo was hiding something, why would he take him along?
After leaving Yesenia's vehicle, the men headed back. This time, Louise drove while Tishon was sent to the back seat. The ride back to Delton was silent. Unable to bear the tension, Jackson finally asked what had happened. The neighbor simply replied that he had lost his temper and refused to explain further. The incident occupied the 20-year-old student's mind all morning, but after hearing rumors about the family's disappearance, he pieced together the events and immediately called the police. Later, the young man was questioned in the office and confirmed everything he had said on the phone. He then directed law enforcement officers to the location of the sought-after vehicle and the container where Luis had discarded the items. Armed with Jackson's testimony, detectives summoned Toledo. Everyone hoped to see Yesenia and her children alive, so they hoped the alleged criminal would confess sooner rather than later. Therefore, they informed him of everything the neighbor had reported and asked him to comment on these statements. However, the suspect suggested that the law enforcement officers were bluffing and refused to engage in conversation. Investigation. Detectives knew that solid evidence was needed for substantial accusations, so they didn't rush things and instead headed to the parking lot. The sought-after car was indeed there, but it was empty. However, Yesenia's personal belongings were found inside: her purse, Idaho card, wallet, work pass, and mobile phone. Forensic experts examined the vehicle for DNA, blood, or fingerprints, but were unable to find anything conclusive. The experts stated that this was because the car had been cleaned thoroughly. Later, it was discovered that the garage keys still bore a single fingerprint, which turned out to be the suspect's. In the trash bin that Tishon had pointed out, they found a bag containing cleaning supplies, a rag, and some clothing. Additionally, bloodstains were found on the discarded mats and men's shoes. A wet shower curtain and the same cleaning products were then found in a container near the couple's home. When the house was thoroughly inspected, it was difficult to find any traces. However, experts were able to find a few stains in the bathroom. Blood spatters were found on the cabinet doors and on the floor under the bathtub. DNA analysis determined that they belonged to Talia and Michael. After this discovery, the lead detective expressed doubt that the missing persons would be found alive. Nevertheless, the search continued. The operation involved relatives and acquaintances of Yesenia, as well as numerous volunteers. They searched everywhere, using dogs and divers, but to no avail. It became obvious that the only person who could give any information was Luis, but he continued to remain silent. Confession. Eventually, during the third interrogation, Toledo cracked and confessed to Yesenia's death. However, he continued to deny that he had harmed the children. He recounted that Jackson Tishon had come over to his house in the evening to play video games. Suddenly, his wife and children appeared on the doorstep. She no longer liked his games and was even more upset by the events of the day, so she demanded that they leave. But when Luis refused, Yesenia walked up to him and started shaking him by the shoulders. To make her stop, he punched her in the neck. Unfortunately, he didn't calculate the force and the blow proved fatal. She couldn't breathe. I could see her gasping for breath and I couldn't do anything to help. She ended up dying looking at me. The suspect finished his story. The detective then provocatively asked, "Do you miss your children? Would you trade places with them?" Toledo nodded silently. The investigator then asked him to explain how they died. The suspect's behavior changed, and he stated that they were massacred by a neighbor who was present. After Yesenia's death, Talia and Michael ran into the room. They saw their mother lying on the floor and began screaming. Luis therefore asked Jackson to take them to another place. However, he soon heard loud noises and followed them into the bathroom. When he looked inside, he saw that they were lying on the floor and the neighbor was holding an axe. Luis burst into tears. The man added that after the incident, he was in shock and lost all self-awareness, and Jackson took advantage of the situation and got rid of the bodies. There was silence in the interrogation room. The last hope of finding the missing alive was gone. All that remained was to find the bodies, but the likelihood of finding them was rapidly diminishing. The detectives doubted the man's sincerity. Nevertheless, his claims had to be verified, so Jackson Tycon was questioned again. He was immediately told the neighbor's version of events. The young man stated that after returning home from college, he never went out again. He also noted that he had no reason to end the lives of Yesenia or Michael and Talia. Moreover, he personally went to the police and reported the incident. Soon his alibi was confirmed. He was cleared of suspicion and released home. The desire to end it all. The search for Yesenia, Michael, and Talia continued relentlessly. Despite considerable public attention and the large number of people involved, the efforts were unsuccessful. Every neighborhood was combed, including woods, bodies of water, and local landfills, all to no avail. Detectives feared that without the bodies, there might not be enough evidence to convict. However, something unexpected soon happened. During one of the routine interrogations, Toledo asked to use the restroom. Accompanied by several officers, since the restroom was at the other end of the building, they had to walk a short distance. During this walk, the detainee asked for a favor. He wanted to be taken home so that he could end his life. Understandably, he was not released. Instead, Luis asked the officers to remove his handcuffs so they could shoot him as if he were trying to escape. This bizarre request was also ignored. In response, one of the officers asked where his family's bodies were. Toledo muttered that he would never reveal that information. When the detainee entered the restroom, he managed to close the door behind him. Soon, there was the sound of breaking glass. It turned out that the suspect had broken the mirror over the sink and used the shards to slash his wrists. He was clearly determined to end his life and was doing everything he could to do so, but it was unclear what was driving him. Was it guilt and remorse for what had happened, or fear of the punishment awaiting him? Later, he did give an explanation for his actions. The policeman broke down the door and pulled out the bloody man, whose devious plan had failed. He received timely medical attention, and his life was not threatened. However, the detainee's behavior revealed much. It turned out that he feared retaliation from his former colleagues, who traditionally had an unkind attitude toward those who harmed children, unlike their attitude toward unfaithful spouses. Luis realized that if he ended up in prison, he was in for a rough ride. His past convictions when he turned in the Latin Kings leaders and the new murder charges would weigh heavily against him. This was confirmed by the contents of his letters sent during the investigation. In one of them, he expressed his desire to tell the whole truth, but could not, as it would be used against him. He reminded everyone that Yesenia had been unfaithful to him, and added that he would never harm the children in any way. "I love them more than anything and continue to love them to this day," he wrote. On October 28, Luis was charged with Yesenia's murder, and the following January, with the murders of Michael and Talia. The prosecution did not rule out that a third person was involved in the crime and helped the accused dispose of the bodies. Given his past criminal experience, Toledo also knew how to clean up a crime scene professionally on his own. Justice has been served. The trial of the man took place in 2017. The prosecutor argued that the accused committed the crime out of jealousy. However, he did not confess to ending the lives of Talia and Michael, since there was no justification for such actions. Therefore, Luis came up with an absurd story involving a neighbor. Kimberly Lasanta, Toledo's sister-in-law, testified in favor of the prosecution. She told the court that because of numerous threats from him, she obtained a restraining order against him. She claimed that Luis had previously sent her text messages threatening to take the children and send someone to harm her. At trial, she testified to her constant fear of him and produced the saved text messages. The defense, on the other hand, attempted to incriminate Jackson Tycon, resulting in a lie detector test and searches of his home and car, though nothing incriminating was found. That day, Jackson was indeed troubled by Luis's erratic behavior. Luis looked tense and scared, but Jackson didn't bother to get to the bottom of it because he couldn't imagine the horrible events that had transpired. Felicita and the children's biological father attended the trial. Relatives of the victims seemed overwhelmed with grief and were almost ready to confront Toledo in the courtroom. After 7 hours of deliberation, the jury found the defendant guilty of second-degree murder in the case of Yesenia and first-degree murder in the case of Talia and Michael. Luis was sentenced to 3 life terms without the possibility of parole. Interestingly, he initially asked for the death penalty, explaining that death row inmates do not face other inmates, and therefore he would not face retaliation from former gang members with whom he was once associated. The defendant knew that there was a bounty on his head and that he would suffer for the rest of his life. Everyone but the defense was convinced that Toledo had no remorse for his actions, but was simply afraid of what awaited him after the trial. The relatives of the victims were satisfied with the verdict.
Outcomes.
It is known that Yesenia and her children were active members of the Spanish-speaking Seventh-day Adventist church community in Deltona. The mother was studying at Rollins College in Winter Park, Florida. In spring 2014, she was expected to graduate with honors with a bachelor's degree in human resources management. After her disappearance, the college posthumously awarded her the degree. As of April 2024, the convicted Toledo continues to serve his sentence. He claims that he did not interrupt Talia and Michael's lives and does not know the whereabouts of their bodies. In one of the letters written from prison, he appears to have coded the message, writing that he sent 3 boxes, 1 large and 2 small ones. The large package reached its destination and the 2 small ones were fine. He added that he cared about what happens to him next, but he was innocent of the charges against him. Perhaps in this way, he wanted to let his acquaintances know that his conscience was clear and he should not be punished. Nevertheless, the evidence was against him. Even the fact that he had previously served 4 years for burglary, robbery, and kidnapping spoke volumes. It is possible that he did lose control of himself and committed inexplicable acts. Experience shows that those who embark on a criminal path rarely get off it.
The case of Sheila Labar, a monster with an angelic appearance. Psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Rain believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila Labar. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila Labar was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila Labar? Sheila Labar was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter Sheila in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to Conthar, the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer. And she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice, adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score, and to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, Labar, Van Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Sheila was frankly annoyed with the child, and she would raise her hand or lock her in a closet if she started crying or acting up. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just Strasut filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them, but all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months, until in the early 80s she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, Sheila demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad, and he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and constantly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors, Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill Labar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Etha, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon Labar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men, whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch, but soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on, he would be her only man. But soon he realized that he was wrong, because his wife continued to meet with different men. Wayne was not satisfied with this, and one day he jumped with fists on Sheila and her next lover, causing them bodily harm. Accustomed to being dominated, Sheila for the first time didn't know how to deal with her third husband, who got into a fight every time a rival appeared on the horizon. Eventually, she filed for divorce and sought a court injunction to stop Wayne from approaching her, accusing him of violence and assault. Another divorce did not affect the turbulent personal life of Sheila, who continued to meet with numerous lovers, changing them like gloves. True, now her relationship increasingly often began to end with lawsuits from men who accused Sheila not just in cruelty, but also in the threat to their lives and health. Thus, one of her boyfriends she deliberately hit by a car and almost ran over. Another almost broke his head, and another scratched his face so that he was forever scarred. Sheila, with age, became more and more dangerous to others. From every man she demanded obedience, and in cases of disobedience, fell into a rage. In 2000, at the age of 74, Bill Labar died of heart failure. Although doctors and police officers did not see a criminal trail in the death of an elderly man, his family members were convinced that Sheila had something to do with it. In their opinion, she had been poisoning Bill little by little for years, and literally drove him into the light. Despite the fact that Bill and Sheila were never officially married, Sheila, according to the will, became the sole heiress of all his property. The relatives tried to challenge this through the courts, but never got anywhere. They are still convinced that the mistress forced Bill to write the will she wanted. House of Temptation. After Bill's death, as I have already mentioned, all his property came under Sheila's complete control. Now she no longer had to consider anyone's opinion. She could do whatever she wanted with the estate she had inherited. She herself called her home a place of seduction and pleasure, where there were no inhibitions. She met men on the streets, in bars, on the internet, lured them to her, and then tried to keep them on the ranch as long as possible. She didn't care about their age, skin color, or any physical appearance. She promised them unearthly pleasure, and then sought to suppress and subjugate them to her will. Sheila regularly tried to seduce couriers by meeting them in the nude and offering an alternative method of payment. But she didn't take into account the fact that she herself was not getting any younger and was nowhere near as attractive as she used to be. They got to the point where couriers simply refused to come to her address. Neighbors noticed that on the ranch Labar constantly come different men, but some hurried to leave the place the same day. Others were delayed, but also for a short time. What was going on in the house itself could only be guessed at. Where had Michael DeLorge disappeared to? Soon, Sheila decided to look for lovers among men who were in dire need of housing, money, or those men who suffered from addiction. This category was the most vulnerable and proved to be an easy prey for the cunning woman, who everywhere posed as a widowed millionaire and talked about her untold wealth inherited by her. In 2004, Labar met on one of the city streets homeless man named Michael DeLodge. He was in a difficult life situation and lost literally everything because of addiction to illegal drugs. His relatives tried to send him to a rehabilitation clinic, but he ran away from there and has been loitering ever since. Sheila liked Michael, and she invited him to her, promising shelter, food, and the necessary drugs in exchange for intimacy. Moving to the ranch, the guy was completely dependent on his old mistress. He complied with all her demands, afraid to be on the street again. But Sheila quickly got into the taste, and her desires became more and more sophisticated. She bound, beat, and humiliated Michael, taking pleasure in it. He tried to escape several times, walking dozens of miles and hiding in homeless shelters, but he never decided to go to the police for fear they wouldn't believe him. Meanwhile, Sheila found him each time and brought him back to the ranch. In desperation, he tried to contact his family members and let them know he was in trouble. His loved ones immediately responded to this disturbing news, but it was too late. In October 2005, Michael DeLodge disappeared without a trace. When his family contacted Sheila directly, she stated that she and Michael had broken up. He had left her, and his current whereabouts were unknown to her. Michael did not show up at any of the places he had been to before. No one who knew him had seen him, and there was no way to contact him. Contacting the police was fruitless, and Labar remained beyond suspicion, trusting Kenny County. Sheila's tales of her exorbitant wealth were greatly exaggerated, and the house and automobile had to be maintained, so she was forced to get a job. Naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of internet phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. However, he had a low IQ level, due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy Labar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time, intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks. But he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin, there were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at Labar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her, and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which he asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find Labar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials, a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny, and there were 2 empty fuel cans lying nearby, the same ones the boy had bought at the local store the day before. But that wasn't all. Also found on the property were the remains of Michael Delage, who had disappeared a few years earlier, and some fingers of some third guy who was never identified. Among other things, a large number of items belonging, judging by the size, to various men were fished out of the sump at the ranch, the fates of which have not been learned. The hostess herself was not at home at the time of the police visit. She had figured it out and gone on the run. Sheila hitchhiked to Boston, where she obviously hoped to get lost. Moreover, on the way, she seduced one of the drivers who gave her a ride, and he trustingly invited her to live in his house. However, the next day, having seen on TV news about the search for a dangerous criminal, the new lover himself called the police and reported that Sheila is now in his bed. It was there that she was arrested. During the search of Sheila's home, another frightening find was made, a box of videotapes. On the tapes, Kenny, Michael, and several other men confessed to horrific crimes, but judging by the guy's appearance and condition, they made these confessions under torture. Since Labar's arrest, her mental health has raised a lot of questions, so the court ordered the necessary evaluations. Sheila was found to have a delusional disorder, as well as signs of schizophrenia. She called herself an angel sent from heaven to protect children from rapists. It was Sheila's failing mental health that became the basis on which her attorney tried to build a defense. He called his client a profoundly sick person and tried to prove that she was not aware of her actions. The reason for this was the mental and physical trauma she had suffered as a child. The defendant herself claimed that many years ago, when she was in that terrible accident and found herself in a coma on the verge of death, she met with God, and the latter told her to cleanse the world of men who infringe on children. Sheila's ex-husbands and some of Sheila's lovers also spoke in court who, in one voice, called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida at Homestead Correctional Facility. No one knows what awaits him or her behind the next turn of fate. We naively plan our lives, dreaming that we will enter a prestigious university, and after graduation, we will get a high-paying job. Later, we will meet a worthy life partner, create a strong family with him, provide our children with a better future, and die in a deep old age in the circle of relatives and friends. This is probably everyone's dream. The success of some only spurs us on, gives us an incentive to live better. But what if things go differently than we expected? As we grow up, we take off our rose-colored glasses, and the clod of adult problems grows every year. It is only how we deal with it that shapes us as a person. From Angela Stalt's memoir on her website, I was born in Bangkok, Thailand, into a military family. My parents raised me with love and respect. I was disciplined but never abused by them. The woman was born in 1972. At the time of the events, she was just over 40 years old. Due to her father's work, the family often had to move around without staying in one place for long periods of time. As soon as the girl got used to the new school and had time to make friends, another move was planned. Angela lived in constant worry and anxiety. The woman's poor health also contributed to her hardships. Angela had been diagnosed with a thyroid disease, for which she had to take maintenance medication for the rest of her life. The disease depressed her mental and emotional state. However, Angela wanted to live and love like all other people. Gradually, her family settled in Georgia. Angela went to high school, where she still had difficulty adjusting. To fit in, she began to socialize with the first company that accepted her. Unfortunately, they were kids from dysfunctional families. There, she met a guy who was 3 years older than Angela and was already in his first year of college. After a year of studying, Angela made the decision to drop out of school and live with a young man. When I was 15 years old and living in Georgia, I married a very abusive man who kept me away from my parents. In addition to being treated like a prisoner, I was regularly punched and choked. Twice, as I recall, he used CPR to bring me to consciousness after choking me. I had broken ribs, a dislocated jaw, numerous bruises. My voice box was damaged and my windpipe was crushed. After 5 years of torment, I found a way to escape from him. At that time, I was diagnosed with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety disorder, and depression. I started taking antidepressants. After the breakup, Angela married a second time fairly quickly. Once again, she found herself trapped with another dominant man. At that point, she was in her early 20s. In 1996, a son was born to the couple, and all would have been nothing, except that the man was not known for his mild temper and also beat the young woman. This exacerbated my symptoms of PTSD, anxiety disorder, and depression. At this time, I started taking a highly addictive drug, Angela recalls. The former lovers eventually broke up and the baby's father disappeared. Angela was left alone with the baby in her arms. Since she never finished school, Angela had few jobs and no profession, and having a baby in her arms made it difficult to find a job. All she could think of in this situation was to find a man to take responsibility for both of them. Around the age of 25, she remarried. From her third marriage, 2 more children were born, a boy and a girl. Despite her health condition and unstable psyche, the woman cherished her family and brought up her children. However, time was ruthless, and for this marriage. In 2011, the man left the family. Later, Angela also claimed that her former spouse was no different from the previous ones. He was a manipulator and a toxic man. According to her, this is what caused the breakup. Now Angela was left alone with 3 children. One thing was good. The older children could already provide for themselves, but Angela had no other stable income except for social payments from the state. She had enough for a modest life, but she wanted to live better. Money decides everything. Probably everyone has heard this expression many times. They are an indicator of prosperity and wealth of a person. They serve as a kind of criterion of his mental abilities, luck, and judgment. However, not everyone knows how to earn them. Some are simply not given. Someone prefers to sit and do nothing while waiting for receipts from outside. Someone and does something, even trying, but gets a little, and maybe wrongly disposing of them. There is another category of people who love money and wait for it, the so-called lovers of easy money. But sooner or later there comes a moment when you have to pay the bills. In 2007, Angela and her family moved to Florida, a suburb of Daytona Beach, and settled near a young couple with children. They turned out to be James Schaefer and Candy Medina. The families quickly became friends with each other. The young people supported Angela in difficult times and often visited each other. On April 2nd, 2013, James said goodbye to Candy as he was going to his next appointment. She was sleeping sweetly in her bed with her children. That night, Candy saw her lover for the last time. Missing persons flyers described James as being about 5 feet 11 inches tall and weighing about 275 pounds. He had brown eyes, brown hair. Distinguishing features included several tattoos, one that read Gringo on his neck, a Metallica skull on his right calf, and NCC on his right forearm. The last time he was seen, he was wearing work clothes that consisted of a black shirt, black pants, and black shoes, the standard dress code for a limousine driver. James Schaefer was born in 1976 and grew up in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, USA. He had a fairly large and close-knit family. He grew up together with his brother and sister, whose names were Christian and Andrew. The guy was fond of sports since childhood, highlighting baseball the most. After graduating from high school, together with his girlfriend Candy went in search of a better life in Florida. The couple was in a relationship for a long time, had 4 children. There was a relaxed atmosphere in the family. Each member of the family was loved. The main financial burden fell on the head of the family, James. Therefore, the guy got a job that brought a good income. The local company was engaged in the service of festive events, as well as private transportation of wealthy clients. The firm provided limousines and other expensive cars for rent. James got along with his colleagues, was polite and tactful with customers, and in good standing with the management. Time passed. It would seem that having a decent income, the financial well-being of the family should only grow, but instead, for several months in a row, the couple owed rent on the house. They even had their water turned off. The landlords were threatening to evict James and Candy soon. This kept James on his toes, looking for ways to stay off the streets. He had to do something about it. On that unfortunate night, James left his home to take a company-provided automobile. The man was to drive a group of people from Kissimmee, Florida, to Tampa, and then back. The drive was to take no more than 2 hours. James arrived at work around 3 a.m., picked up the vehicle, and left to complete the assignment, but never returned home. Candy became worried as a lot of time had passed and James never made contact. Later, strange messages started coming from him saying that he needed to disappear for a period of time. The poor woman didn't understand anything. Candy began calling family and friends in the hope of finding out where James was and what had happened to him. And on April 4th, the father of the missing man decided to contact the police to report his son's disappearance. On April 21st, 2013, the sheriff's office received a call from a woman who said she knew someone who might be involved in James's death. She claimed that James Schaefer was not missing or a runaway. He was murdered. The witness blamed it on her own sister. The woman said her relative had attacked the man and now she was going to kill him. Allegedly, at a family meeting, her sister confessed to everyone about killing her best friend under the influence of illegal substances. The caller was then forced to contact the police as she was worried about her demented sister's children. After James's father reported James to the police, the detectives immediately began their investigation. First, they decided to talk to Candy. Perhaps she knew something about her loved one's disappearance or had been causing wariness lately. Candy reported that her husband had gone to work, and nothing in his behavior seemed suspicious to her, except perhaps the messages that came from James and messengers after his disappearance. It later turned out that several other people in the family's inner circle had received similar texts. This information required investigation. The management of the company where James worked explained that the worker was indeed listed as one of the best employees, and such a sudden disappearance was not like him. They helped detectives clarify the time and reconstruct some of the events of that day. James arrived at work to pick up his car, got it ready to leave, and left around 4 a.m. However, the police still managed to find out something interesting. Employees of the firm said that shortly before his disappearance, James complained about financial problems and asked to borrow money. It is quite possible that this could be the reason for his disappearance. The man could have left the city to disappear from unfulfilled obligations and creditors. It was established that James had a gambling addiction. This explained his financial problems and utility and rent arrears. Detectives took this fact as a primary basis, so they continued to contact family relatives and friends. That's how police officers found themselves on the doorstep of James and Candy's friend and neighbor, Angela Stold. Angela greeted the police officers calmly, telling them that she was saddened by the disappearance of James, who was indeed her friend. He often stopped by her place after his shift for a drink, a heart-to-heart chat, and to relax. They had purely platonic feelings for each other. When Angela was having financial problems, she approached James asking for help, to which he offered to let her do his personal bookkeeping. When asked why his wife wasn't doing it, Angela replied that there was nothing strange about it. Thus, they helped each other. She would get a small reward for the work she did, and he would get his affairs in order. Initially, everything was fine, but at one point he started having financial problems. He wanted to get social support from the state. That's why he decided to involve Angela. So their friendly relationship turned into a dependent relationship on each other. After communicating with Angela, the police officers could not get away from the idea that there was something suspicious about Angela having access to James's accounts. Several transactions that had been made after the man's disappearance raised questions, and their meetings in the mornings after work raised some doubts about the fidelity of the missing man. So the police decided to take a closer look at the family friend. Angela seemed sincere, relaxed. There was no particular reason not to believe her after all. People often ask someone close to them to do the bookkeeping or hire specialists, so Stolt was ruled out as a suspect. Once established, it seemed obvious that James's flight was due to financial problems or something similar. There was money involved in the case. Investigators went to Angela's house again, but this time they decided to do more than just talk outside the house. They also asked to see her home. But what appeared before their eyes threw the representatives of law enforcement agencies into confusion. All the rooms were littered with garbage. Dirty plates with leftovers were everywhere. The leftovers were spoiled, and it all stank. In short, it was unsanitary. It was clear that Angela had some kind of mental problems. However, they did not find James here. This is how Angela tells it. Because of my illness and injuries, I have not been able to properly clean or maintain my house for a long time. The police asked Angela to take part in the formal interrogation, which would be audio recorded. She repeated everything she had said earlier. She also said that her buddy was not addicted to substances, but was an occasional user, with some prescription drugs involved. For James, she said, it was an opportunity to relax on the weekends. Angela also said that the last time she saw the man was after he was reported missing. He came to her home and asked for money, to which she replied that she would not give him $1. The response angered the man, however, he left her home. The police also asked Angela to make a call to James, to explain the situation with the bills, to inform him that there is a big overspend, and that it could turn into something bad, to which she refused, citing the fact that he was no longer in contact with her. Angela also told about the problems at James' work, that someone from the staff threatened him, asking him to return a debt, so the detective's interest shifted to James's co-workers and his boss. A sudden call on April 21, 2013 made adjustments to the investigation of the case. The information could not be ignored. Once again, the detectives went to Angela Stolt, except that there was no trace left of the calm and balanced woman. They were met on the doorstep by a woman who clearly hadn't looked after herself in days. Her hair was sloppy. She seemed to be out of sorts. Her behavior was also inadequate, which was the reason she was deemed dangerous, both to herself and to society. On this basis, Angela was taken into custody, and later she was sent to a psychiatric hospital for 72 hours for the necessary evaluation. Before she was placed in the hospital, she spent some time under arrest at the local police department. So it was established that on April 3, 2013, she picked up James Schaefer from work after completing an order. James was alarmed. He needed to fix the situation or his family would be evicted from the house. Either he and his children would be left on the street, or they would have to move back in with their parents, which wasn't an option either. In addition, he did not want to admit to himself and his family that his difficult financial situation was caused by gambling. He was so eager to win back what he had lost. But luck had turned away from James, and there was no one else to turn to at work. It was embarrassing in front of his co-workers. He'd always repaid his debts before, but now things were going wrong. Maybe Angela will help out, and if not, I'll ask her father to help. He helped me out once before, and I paid him back all my debts on time, James pondered. Angela suggested they come in and have a glass of a mixture of peach schnapps and vodka. And for more peace of mind, let's add something else. It'll help you relax, Angela suggested. James was fine with the drug, which, by the way, was only available by prescription. He even crushed the pills himself so that they would dissolve faster and enhance the effect of the alcohol. After drinking a glass, James asked his friend if her father could lend him an amount between $2,000 and $4,000. James knew that his friend's father was seriously ill and literally on the verge of death. Therefore, he himself needed money for treatment, but his situation was desperate. How can he ask such a thing, especially now? He already owes me money. I can barely make ends meet. Angela was indignant, but she didn't let on. You'll have to ask your father about that, Angela replied. James then offered to give her a ride to her parents' house so that she wouldn't have to stall and find out as soon as possible. Hope for a speedy resolution to the trouble settled in his heart. Around 5 a.m., they set out on the road. Since it was still early, Angela's father was asleep, and the woman had changed her mind about going to him. She suggested stopping the car near the cemetery located in Dayton. No one expected what happened afterward. At least that's what Angela told the police. I took James to my favorite place in Dayton, which turned out to be the cemetery, to talk to him alone. I knew he would scream, and I didn't want my kids to be abused anymore. They were being terrorized by their father, and they didn't need any more of that. So when we parked, we turned around in our seats facing each other with our backs against the doors, Angela recalled. She told James that she would not borrow money for him from her father, much less force him to take out loans for that purpose, and that she would stop doing his bookkeeping after they sorted out the bills and Social Security payments. Maul. Enough of him setting her up. Jason became enraged, started screaming and grabbed her by the throat. He screamed, "I'm going to kill you! You can't do that! It's my money!" I grabbed my cell phone that was on the console. He threw it into the back seat of my car, continuing his tirade. Angela describes his condition. According to her, he threatened that he would kill her children as well. Stolt took these threats seriously. To defend herself, she grabbed the first thing she could get her hands on from the trunk. That tool turned out to be an ice axe, which she carried with her as camping and hiking equipment. Angela struck James and hit him in the eye, but he wasn't dead. He was completely disoriented. James began to scream. Angela then took a PVC cord that she used on hikes to climb trees. Wrapping the cord around her roommate's throat, she rested her feet on the back of the driver's seat and began pulling hard on his neck. After a while, the man stopped moving. Angela pulled the ice pick out of the victim's right eye. When asked by the police about where in the car such equipment came from, the neighbor explained that she and her family were going to go camping in the next month. All these gadgets were necessary for her, and she was just storing them in the car. Everyone at Angela's interrogation was horrified. In fact, James hadn't asked for anything supernatural. She could have refused him and stopped communicating with him further. Moreover, they believed that there might not have been any threats from James at all, and that Angela's mental state had played a cruel joke on her. A medical examination later showed that Angela was aware of her own actions during the incident. The police also did not rule out that the crime could have been planned in advance. Firstly, the strange accessories in the car were questionable. Secondly, why leave the house to just talk when it could have been done in front of witnesses? To which Angela also had an answer. I knew he had some violent tendencies in the past, but he had never been violent towards me before. If I thought he was going to use physical force, I wouldn't have taken him to a place where I was in danger. I would have taken him to some public place. He almost killed me. Things could have easily gone differently, and I wouldn't have put myself in that situation. When it was over, Angela was very frightened. According to her, she was in shock, but that didn't stop her from stabbing the other eye again to make sure James was dead. But the gruesome story didn't end there. To avoid getting blood splattered on her car, she wrapped the dead man in a plastic bag. When he finally let go of me, I realized he was dead, got out of the car, and I threw up. It took quite a while before I could breathe, and then I was faced with a new kind of horror. I was on autopilot, my mind strangely shut down, and I just started doing something. I went back to the car to get my cell phone to call the police, but I couldn't find it. So I covered it up as best I could and drove to the police station. As I drove down Fort Smith Boulevard, I panicked, the thoughts going through my head telling me that the police would never believe me. My life was over. I would lose my children. I kept looking at him and the fear kept building. Anyway, with James' corpse, Angela arrived home. After that, she dragged the body to the shed. Here, taking a hacksaw, she began to cut it into pieces. The severed body fragments, Angela decided to put them into pots and pans, oiling them. A remarkable fact is that when Angela first spoke to the police about James's disappearance, his body parts were just being boiled in pots and pans. However, this went unnoticed as the investigators did not enter the house that time. When police first entered Angela's home, Stal had already completely dismembered the body. She packed the individual parts into garbage bags and scattered them in different parts of the city. Some sources say that she was assisted in this by her older children, whom she told that she had accidentally hit a deer on the road. At the same time, she strictly forbade them to enter the shed so that they would not see the evidence of the crime. Following this confession, Angela was arrested for second-degree murder. Police officers actively searched for James's posture. Out of 206 bones, they were only able to locate 56. James Schaefer was buried in a closed casket. None of his relatives could bid him a proper farewell. Afterwards, the prosecutor's office upgraded the crime to first-degree murder because many facts pointed to a premeditated act. In addition, Angela tried to get rid of the body, covering her tracks, which wanted to confuse the investigation. Investigators believed that the woman's plan was well thought out and also included misinformation of James's relatives. For this purpose, she used his cell phone, from which she wrote to his wife and family, as well as some friends. On December 2nd, 2014, Angela Stal went on trial. The woman immediately confessed to the murder, but insisted that she did it as a result of self-defense. The prosecutor's office tried to refute her words, as the main motive was considered to be money. Angela had been in financial trouble for most of her life, making her fearful that James would cheat and use her. That morning, when they had been drinking with James, the woman had clearly had too much to drink. Her anger at him, at life, and at the injustice of the men around her spilled out into an assault. On December 5th, 2014, the jury retired to deliberate on the verdict. After deliberating, they unanimously found Angela guilty of first-degree murder, as well as abuse of the body, tampering with evidence. As a result, she was sentenced to life in prison without parole. What was going on in Angela's head is hard to imagine. A sick mind, a sick body, a tortured soul. However, apparently Angela still doesn't realize what she has done. She didn't just take the life of a man she considered her best friend. She brutalized him without giving him a single chance for salvation. And after all, like a butcher butchering a carcass, she dismembered James and boiled him in a pot. Money had ruined more than one friendship, but to do it this way, you'd better stay away from friends like that. Mom is a special person in the life of each of us. In all languages, this word sounds affectionate and tender because it carries only goodness and understanding. Mommy is the only word a person shouts in moments of pain, fear, or joy. But unfortunately, children are not always the most important thing in a mother's life. A high-profile crime that took place in 2016 in one of the largest states in the United States, Texas, has progressed throughout the country. A young and successful 42-year-old woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her 2 adult daughters in the backyard of her home. But why? Let's start at the beginning and try to figure out what led a loving mother to such a cruel act. Christy Bird was born in the city of Decatur, Alabama in 1974 in the family of Rebecca Bird. The girl's parents separated when she was very young. Mom Christy had to work hard to provide a poverty-free existence for her child. The main role in the upbringing of Christy took her grandfather. The girl adored her grandfather because he pampered her and taught her unusual things, such as how to hold a gun. The retired officer had an impressive collection of weapons. The 2 of them would lock themselves in a semi-basement dark room where they would spend hours looking at the treasures under her grandfather's fascinating stories. From early childhood, a person tries to find out his place in life, learns to build relationships with others, receives education for further application of the knowledge gained in real life. But Christy did not strive for knowledge. Although she studied in one of the best schools in the state, the study was not interested in the young rebel. Constant clashes with peers severely traumatized her childhood psyche. As a result of regular attacks and difficulties with classmates, Christy barely finishes school. After school, Christy moves to the northern part of Alabama in Lawrence County to attend university. Here, she takes a job as a secretary at a transportation company where she meets James Sheets, a young and promising specialist. The young people spend hours walking around the city. They hike together. They go on vacation to Christy's hometown. A strong and long-lasting relationship develops between them. After a few years, they get married and move to Kathy's town. On one of the quietest streets of the city, the young family buys a house. On April 19, 1994, their first daughter, Taylor, was born. Jason was happy because he had always dreamed of a little daughter. The Sheets family was quite well-to-do and happy. Jason worked successfully in a large oil and gas company as an IT consultant. Christy raised her daughter and was an exemplary housewife. On October 21, 1998, Christy and Jason had a second daughter who was named Madison. Family life went on in a calm and measured way. Jason was working. Christy was taking care of the children. Until tragedy struck, which once and for all changed the former way of life of the family. In 2012, Christy's grandfather died. She loved him like the father she never had. The woman had a very hard time experiencing such a great loss. The family idol was replaced by psychologists and antidepressants. But just 2 months later, still not recovered from the loss of her grandfather, Christy's mother dies. Another tragedy morally kills the woman, and she gets into a clinic with a mental disorder for the first time. One clinic is replaced by another. Antidepressants are replaced by hard alcohol. Christy's internal state remains very unstable and vulnerable for a long time. Husband and daughters, for a long time in every possible way, try to support a dear and beloved person. After a while, they seem to succeed. Christy returns to her old life. She gets a job as a manager in a laser cosmetology clinic where they specialize in the removal of tattoos. Work takes up all her time, while her beloved husband and daughters try to occupy her heart and thoughts. On September 25, 2015, the day of her daughters, Christy posts a picture of Taylor and Madison on her Facebook page. She captions it with a declaration of motherly love. Christy called her children amazing, sweet, kind, beautiful, and smart girls. "You have no idea how much I love and cherish you," Christy wrote at the time, addressing her daughters. In January of that year, she published another strong post, already in defense of her right to bear arms. A post whose photo showed a polished gun on a table and 7 bullets next to it. "I have 10 guns. Obama wants 8 of my guns. How many guns do I have?" Responding to the comments, she writes, "That's right, I have 10 guns." Christy Sheets has been a vocal supporter of legislation to make firearms widely available to the public. In particular, she was against the Democratic Party's initiative to ban the free trade of semi-automatic handguns. Christy claimed it would violate her family's right to defend themselves. How ironic that in the end, Christy Sheets' love and admiration for and staunch defense of guns, and her belief in the right to bear arms, led to the tragic loss of her 2 daughters and her own life. On June 24, 2016, Jason's birthday, Christy called her daughters over for a family dinner. That night, the entire family gathered in the living room. But instead of a celebratory dinner, Jason wanted to inform his daughters of his impending divorce. Christy overheard their conversation. An uproar broke out in the living room. She was yelling. She cursed. Then she left. Jason tried to calm the girls down, promised things would get better. But Christy came back with a gun in her hand. Jason covered the children. Screaming and panic took over the house. Madison hid behind the couch and discreetly called emergency services. When the dispatcher answered, the girl was overtaken by her mother. Mommy, don't shoot, don't shoot." Wheezing, moaning, silence, a voice was heard again. "Don't shoot, there are children. I'll do what you want, don't shoot." The call was interrupted. In the second call, made by 22-year-old Taylor, she is unable to speak or relay information to the dispatcher. She was completely stumped by the incredible chaos that was unfolding in the family home. Taylor was shot twice by her mother, who fired the fatal shot as her daughter was dying on the ground outside the family home. Holding a gun, Christy simply fired it several times at Taylor and Madison. At 5 p.m., police arrived at the scene of the tragedy after several 911 calls. Near Christy and Jason's home, police officers saw the bodies of 17-year-old Madison Sheets and 22-year-old Taylor Sheets on the ground. Christy was standing over Madison's body with a gun in her hand. She was clearly about to fire another shot at the girl. The police officer, not knowing if the victim was alive, ordered her to drop the weapon immediately. Christy ignored this demand, at which point the officers opened fire at point-blank range. The woman was killed at the scene. An examination of the victims revealed that 17-year-old Madison died instantly from her injuries, and 22-year-old Taylor was wounded. She was flown by helicopter to the hospital, but unfortunately, her life could not be saved. So for both daughters, the injuries inflicted by their own mother proved fatal. The only survivor of the massacre was 45-year-old Jason Sheets. Christy shot him too, but he managed to take refuge in the house of neighbors, who asked him to call the police. The neighbors heard him pleading with Christy, "Don't hurt them, they're our kids." But Christy didn't heed those words. Instead, she fired a couple of bullets in Jason's direction. Only a lucky break saved him from death. However, the police were not immediately able to question Jason about the reasons for the incident. When the police arrived at the scene, they immediately sent him to the hospital in a state of deep shock. The area near the house where the family tragedy played out was cordoned off. Shocked neighbors and random witnesses were repeatedly questioned. As interviews began, it was most accurately established that at first there were sounds of bickering coming from the house. Then, according to witnesses concerned about what was happening, Christy began beating the girls. Then, taking a .38 caliber shotgun, she shot Madison and then Taylor at point-blank range. The girls, bleeding, ran out of the house. Madison managed to take only a few steps before falling to the ground and collapsing in agony. Seeing this, the mother fired another shot in Taylor's direction. She fell, and Christy went inside the house and cold-bloodedly reloaded the shotgun and finished her off with a point-blank shot. Witnesses said Christy acted in cold blood and without emotion. After the first shots rang out back in the living room of the home, all family members ran outside. It was a family argument that escalated into a shooting, but we're still trying to piece everything together. That was the first version of what happened, voiced for the TV news crews that arrived at the scene of the tragedy. What drove 42-year-old Christy Bird Sheets to commit this unthinkably brutal crime? The detectives don't know the exact reasons. All they have at their disposal are dry facts. So, police say, in the house of the family Sheets, not all was not well. Over several years, because of conflicts between family members, to Sheets more than a dozen times called the police patrol. In the end, Christy's husband and father of both girls, 45-year-old Jason Sheets, could not stand it and left his wife. But he did return to her recently. On the day of the tragedy, the entire family gathered for dinner at Christy's invitation. Even Taylor, a college student after a recent fight with her mother, came home to celebrate Jason's birthday with her family. Shocked observers and acquaintances of the family were shocked by what happened. How and why did a mother kill her own daughters? Neighbor Gino Hernandez recalls the Sheets family. "I knew both girls since they were 10 years old," the man said, wiping away tears. "They were always nice, outgoing girls. Always waved and said hello when they walked by. The other thing is Christy. She wouldn't even stop by the barbecue. It was always like she was on her own." "Wonderful girls, and Jason's a good guy too," another neighbor asserted. Their problems were all about Christy. The investigation also agrees with the neighbors. It has already been revealed that Christy had conflicts with both daughters before. Also, official authorities have already reported that Christy suffered from mental illness. On June 29, 2016, at the first press conference, Sheriff Troy Niels told reporters that the 42-year-old mother was depressed and had made repeated attempts to take her own life because she was on the verge of divorcing her husband. According to the police spokesman, the couple's marriage began to crumble back in 2012. Just then, the grandfather who raised Christy Sheets died. To kill family members, Mrs. Sheets used a gun, which she inherited from a deceased relative. Also, one of the possible reasons for the serious discord in the family, the sheriff called Christy's unwillingness to put up with the upcoming marriage of her eldest daughter, Taylor. A few days before the shots were fired, Christy Sheets had an argument with her oldest daughter where she attempted to apply house arrest to Taylor and forbid her from seeing her fiancé. Jason did not agree with his wife that house arrest was an appropriate punishment for a 22-year-old girl, noted Nels. Juan Sebastian Logo, 23, and Taylor Sheets, 22, were in the same year of college in the art department. The young people had been dating for 4 years. On social media, they showed how in love they were and how they were preparing for their upcoming wedding. A small wedding ceremony was planned for June 27th. It has been suggested that the mother may have objected to the marriage of Taylor and Sebastian, who was of Hispanic descent. Disagreeing with his wife, Jason Sheets insisted that incarcerating their eldest daughter was inappropriate punishment for an adult. Later, Jason Sheets would still testify, telling investigators that his wife had called their daughters to inform them of the divorce. She had been notified of it, but instead of explaining in front of the children, she pointed a gun at them and shot them several times. But she did not shoot her husband. As Mr. Sheets stated, the wife's motive was that she wanted to make him suffer.
According to Jason Sheets, his wife's downward spiral began in 2012 after she lost her grandfather and then lost her mother just 2 months later. Apparently, the gun she used to kill her daughters was a gift from her grandfather. Jason Sheets revealed that his wife applied for a license to carry a gun, but was denied because of her mental illness. This begs the question, what did Christy Sheets think could have triggered the need to punish her husband and make him suffer? Was it the breakdown of their marriage? The feeling that control and valor in her life had been lost? Hinted at in a cluster of Facebook rants where Christy talked about protecting herself and her family. Or could Christy Sheets' decision to kill her daughters have been driven in some way by medication or the continued deterioration of her mental state? Jason Sheets told police that his wife suffered from depression. She was taking prescribed pills by the handful and seeing a therapist. She had been treated 3 times in recent years after attempting to leave her life at a private psychiatric hospital, Sheriff Nels reported. Christy Sheets had ample time and opportunity to kill her husband, but she didn't. Jason realized that Christy wanted him to suffer, Sheriff Nels said, echoing Jason Sheets, recounting the details of the incident for the first time. Mr. Sheets revealed that Christy knew about how much he loved Taylor and Madison and how much they loved him, Nels continued. Perhaps the complete rift in the family and the realization that she was losing not only her husband, but her daughters as well, exacerbated Christy's already difficult emotional state, and she grabbed a gun foreshadowing her tragic end as well. Madison Davey, a close family friend, gave a great interview in which he spoke about the relationships within the family. He was the best dad in the world. I used to hang out with them, and he loved being around us. They were so funny together. You'd think the sisters would fight, but no, Davey said. They loved each other very much and were always laughing. Davey went on to say that both daughters had a very close relationship with each other and with their father. Jason would do anything to protect them, and he tried to do that, but Christy was going to kill that day, Davey said. In one attempt to take her own life, Christy, perhaps only intimidating, pulled out a gun and said goodbye to her family with screams and tears. But she didn't get the desired effect. Jason replied indifferently, "If you want to just shoot yourself, don't touch us, just shoot yourself." But Christy replied, "No, that will be your punishment." Relatives, friends, and acquaintances were sure that something was bound to happen in this family, but no one could think that a woman would kill her daughters. Christy was bringing harm to her family. She was mentally unstable. The sheriff's department explained that police officers were repeatedly called to the home of Christy and Jason, who were having violent arguments. Since January 2012, police have received 14 calls for service. 3 of them involved Christy threatening to take her own life, having previously been diagnosed with mental health issues. Juan Sebastian's inconsolable sister Maria stated that the Sheets sisters were some of the sweetest, most sensible and kind-hearted girls she had ever met. Today, Mariah found it hard to believe that not so long ago, she and Taylor were having carefree fun at a party and looking forward to her wedding day to Sebastian. "You've already become a member of our family, and that will remain the same," she addresses her friend. "You were a light in this crazy world, and we will always remember you."
That day of the brutal crime, where the lives of young girls with everything ahead of them were cut short, has long stirred the public. People grieved with Jason. Older sister Taylor Sheets went to school, worked as a caregiver for Care.com, and dreamed of a long, happy life with the man she loved. Younger sister, Madison, studied at school, and at the same time worked as a nanny. On the day of the funeral of the girls mourned the whole city. Social networks and TV news channels again covered this terrible event. Is it possible that the reason for such a terrible tragedy is the availability of guns? The unwillingness of the states to finally take up and address the issue of firearms sales has once again led to another tragedy. An ordinary Texas woman, Christy Sheets, shot and killed her own 2 daughters during a domestic dispute. Such cases are not surprising for the U.S. As long as Republicans and Democrats are pulling the cat by the tail, not even trying to come to a compromise, people will die. The exact causes of the conflict that led to such tragic consequences will remain unknown. However, it is enough that the police came to this house more than once because of regular conflicts. That is, it was already clear that the family was dysfunctional, but they were still left with guns. To summarize, I would like to go back to the beginning of this story. A mother is the closest and dearest person to her children, and children are the most important thing in life for a mother. The case of Christy Sheets is an exception rather than a reality. Amidst her inner heartache, her maternal instinct seems to have completely shut down and no one was able to stop her. But Christy's plan is fully realized. After the murder of his daughters, Jason Sheets will have to live with those horrible memories for the rest of his life. A wolf in sheep's clothing. The Roman poet Decimus Junius Juvenal once said, "There is scarcely a litigation in which the cause of the quarrel is not a woman. Times change, but morals remain the same, and not everyone may agree, but whatever happens, a lot of it comes down to the female gender. Often behind every twisted story is a woman." In the fall of 2001, another gruesome event rocked Oklahoma City. The city is in the heart of a deeply religious belt. The so-called Bible Belt of the United States is known as a hotbed of religious and conservative values. At the same time, this part of America is known for its high rates of crime, divorce, and teen pregnancy. The cold-blooded crime that occurred in Andrews' family, saddening and outraging the faith community, added to the unfortunate list. No breaks. One rainy October morning, a strange phone call rang in the office of Robert Andrew, senior vice president of a well-known advertising company. The man on the other end of the phone identified himself as a doctor at a local hospital. The unidentified man reported that Brenda, Mr. Andrews' wife, was in critical condition. In a panic, Rob rushed to his car, started the engine, and headed for the clinic. On the way, he noticed that when he pressed the brake pedal, the vehicle would not stop. After running a red traffic light, he successfully pulled over to the side of the road. The car stopped. Miraculously surviving, he called a cab. When he got to the hospital, he learned that his wife was not a patient. When Rob took the car to a repair shop, the technician told him that the brake hoses had been cut. The unfortunate man was speechless with surprise. Someone had obviously wanted to take his life and had come up with a good reason to drive the car. But who was capable of such an act? Putting all the details together, Rob headed to the police station. He informed law enforcement officials that someone had tried to take his life, and apparently, he had a pretty good idea who it was. The inseparable couple. Robert and Brenda were married for about 17 years. The couple had 2 beautiful children during their marriage. The couple were very religious, so they raised their children in faith and morals. Together, they attended church, were engaged in charity. To the average person, their union seemed happy and reliable, however. In October 2001, their family ship went down. Mrs. Andrew left her husband and filed for divorce. Good girl Brenda. Brenda Evers was born on December 16, 1963 in Enid, Oklahoma. The girl's parents were devout Christians. They gathered around the table for meals together, held group prayers, and attended the parish. Brenda grew up a quiet and peaceful child. She did well in school. She spent most of her time at church helping others. When many of her peers were dating guys, she waited for the one and only for life. In high school, the girl was a cheerleader for the soccer team. She was very fond of dancing, but never participated in parties. In general, in her younger years, Brenda was a model of piety and modesty, like her mother. By the way, she wanted to be like her mother in everything. Therefore, after marriage, she intended to become a housewife and devote herself to her husband and children. First, love. At the age of 17, the girl met Rob Andrew, the older brother of her friend. He was older and studied at one of the state universities. Young people began to communicate. It turned out that they had a lot in common, despite the fact that the guy was a Baptist and Brenda was a Lutheran. The two of them had conservative views on life, attended church, and dreamed of creating a large and friendly family, so the friendly relationship grew into a romantic one. After a while, the girl entered college in Winfield, Kansas. Despite the distance of 125 miles between them, the couple actively kept in touch. Eventually, to be closer to her lover, a year later Brenda transferred to a university in Ohio in Stillwater. Close to the summer of 1984, the lovers became husband and wife, metamorphosis. Soon, Robert received a tempting job offer in Houston, Texas. The man doubted the decision, but Brenda convinced her spouse. While he was building a career as an advertising manager, she managed to get a degree and get a job in banking. Mrs. Andrew fell in love with the tall buildings of the city, nightclubs, and busy life. Texas changed the young woman. She got rid of her excessive modesty. She began to take care of herself, wear fashionable clothes, makeup, made a large circle of friends. Her husband was not very pleased with his wife's transformation. He thought that a believing woman should be more restrained. Besides, Rob was homesick. Therefore, when he was offered to return to the advertising agency in Oklahoma City, he gladly agreed. However, Brenda did not support her spouse. They even quarreled on this ground. Then still came to a compromise. The couple agreed that Robert will settle in a new place and find a suitable house. And if everything works out well, the wife will join him. A few months they lived separately from each other. Subsequently, the family was reunited. In the early 1990s, the Andrew couple settled in a luxurious house in the prestigious neighborhood of Landsbrook, and 9 months later they had a daughter, Tricity. Brenda even quit her job to become a housewife and engage in child rearing. 4 years later came son Parker. It seemed that there came a family idyll. For this, they had everything: love, children, home, and financial prosperity. What happened in Mrs. Andrews' garage? On November 20th, 2001, a few days before Thanksgiving, Rob planned to stop by Brenda's house. He had made arrangements with her in advance to take the children with him for the holidays. At the time, the couple was divorced. In the evening, his ex-wife met him on the doorstep of the house. She asked the man to go to the garage and help with the faulty equipment. When he bent down, he heard footsteps behind him. Robert turned toward the noise. A gunshot rang out and the wounded man fell to the concrete floor. Around 6 p.m., the emergency services received a call. The caller turned out to be Brenda Andrew. She reported that she was injured and her husband was dead. An ambulance immediately rushed to the scene. When the paramedics arrived, they found a horrific scene. In the garage, in a pool of blood, lay a man whose cause of death was a gunshot wound. His wife was luckier, shot in the arm. Brenda's clothes were stained with blood, and the woman herself looked remarkably detached. The paramedic put her condition down to shock. "I tried to give Rob first aid, but I think he's dead," she reported. The victim's hand was bandaged, and she was later taken to the hospital. As the ambulance left the scene, police began their examination. The first thing they found was a .22 caliber bullet lodged in the wall. A little while later, a shotgun shell casing was found, so multiple weapons were used in the attack. The second thing the officers noticed was the victim's wallet. He still had it on him, so the shooting wasn't connected to a robbery. To understand what happened, it was necessary to interview Mr. Andrews' ex-wife. At the clinic, Brenda explained the reason for their meeting. She also explained that while they were busy, 2 masked armed men entered the garage. The thugs shouted something in their direction, but what exactly she couldn't hear. One of them then shot Rob twice, and the other wounded her as she was about to flee. After that, the attackers hurriedly fled. Who the attackers were and what they had come for was not known to her. However, the victim added that Robert could hardly have enemies, as he was a decent and kind person, always helping other people. The woman admitted that she was frightened by what happened, especially the fact that there were children in the house at the time of the attack. However, many things in her words were contradictory. It was clear to the police that Brenda was not telling the truth, especially the fact that the children were not packed for the trip. Interviews with neighbors yielded no positive results. None of them had noticed anything strange that fateful evening. Hoping to find out the details of Brenda and Robert's personal life, the detectives decided to question the couple's acquaintances. Midlife crisis. It turns out that after the birth of their second child, the relationship between the couple became strained. Mr. Andrew repeatedly told friends and pastor that Brenda was abusive to him, and repeatedly stated that she hated their marriage. Ronnie Stump, a friend of Robert's who was a frequent visitor to the bereaved family, said he thought their feelings were abnormal. Brenda was not shy about her expressions even in the presence of strangers, and Rob clearly loved the woman more than she deserved, as he forgave her antics for quite a long time. Friends of the family unanimously claimed that she had undergone a strange metamorphosis. From an ordinary housewife, she turned into a woman of easy behavior. These accusations were not unfounded. There was a lot of evidence to support them. Brenda was clearly going through a midlife crisis. Her style of dress had changed. The once sophisticated woman began to dress vulgarly and brightly painted. But it didn't stop there. Mrs. Andrew became very secretive to her husband. She did not tell him where and with whom she spent time, what she was doing. Soon Robert became aware of his wife's affairs on the side. In October 1997, she began a relationship with Rick Nunley, the husband of a friend. The man was Brenda's co-worker while working at an Oklahoma bank. The couple dated for a year, and afterward had an occasional phone relationship. Later, another lover was local store owner James Higgins. At first, he was only impressed by the frank outfits and flirting, and after from the hands of Brenda, received the keys to the hotel. The man went about skillful seductress, and met with her 1-2 times a week. This affair lasted about 5 years. All this time, Rob remained in complete ignorance. However, he realized that their marriage is cracking at the seams. In addition, his wife practically stopped talking to him and spending time. He hoped that everything will eventually get better and tried with all his might to keep the family. In 2001, Brenda stopped the relationship with Higgins, but not for the sake of her husband and the holy bonds of marriage. She was sinking more and more into the abyss of debauchery and vice. Fatal love. 2 years earlier, a Baptist church had sprung up in Oklahoma City, largely due to Mr. Andrews' contributions. In it, the man became a deacon, and his wife took the position of Sunday school teacher. From the outside, their family looked prosperous, adhering to morals and traditions. At that time, Brenda had not completely lost the image of a model wife. She gladly taught the children the basics of religion and fellowship. There she met James Pavitt, a new lover. He was also a part-time school teacher, married and generally religious, and was friends with Rob. However, he too could not resist the charms and dazzling smile of Brenda. In the spring of 2001, they began to meet. At first they did it secretly, but then, having lost the limits of prudence, they stopped hiding their feelings. Everyone in the church saw their sympathy for each other. Rob suspected his wife of infidelity and had a big fight with her. They separated. Just by this time, James had divorced his wife. Rob still dreamed of restoring the family, but Brenda was adamant and even filed for divorce. Just after this event, there was a strange call to Mr. Andrews' office, and then a shocking car malfunction. In making an attempt on his life, Rob suspected the Sweet couple, which he reported to the police. What could have caused such thoughts in an open and ingenuous man? The same question was asked by law enforcement officials. Rob did not prevent the divorce. The agreement on children was reached. He helped Brenda financially. What else was there not to please a cheating husband? It was all about the money. In addition to teaching school, James Pavitt was an insurance agent. In the summer of that year, he took out an $800,000 insurance policy on Mr. Andrew. Brenda was the sole beneficiary. It's about the insurance. When officers began investigating the bizarre attack on Mr. Andrews' family, in addition to the relationship between the couple, they also became aware of the incident involving the car's brakes. Detectives compared the facts. Brenda's involvement in the murder of her husband became clearer. In addition, there was a new suspect in the case, her newfound lover. Then investigators learned that 2 weeks before the incident in the garage, Rob Andrew paid a visit to the insurance company. He wanted to exclude his unfaithful wife from his insurance policy. However, James refused to do so, citing that the contents of the contract could only be changed by the beneficiary himself, that is, Brenda Andrew. Not taking his former friend's word for it, Rob decided to verify the information with management. It turned out that Brenda and James had attempted to forge the insurance policy by transferring ownership to Mrs. Andrew. Rob's signature was falsified, plus it was dated retroactively. Mr. Andrew was assured by Pavitt's superiors that he still owned the policy, and only the policyholder could change the terms of the contract. When James learned of the incident, he was very angry, as the circumstances discovered were the reason for his dismissal. Investigation. Officers also became aware that Robert was in possession of a 16-gauge shotgun. When Rob was moving out of the house, Brenda did not give him the weapon. During a search of Andrew's home, the shotgun was strangely not found. Meanwhile, an inspection at Gigstad's neighbor's house yielded an unexpected result. A fired shell casing from the shotgun they were looking for was found on the bedroom floor, and several .22 caliber bullets were found in the attic of the Gigstad family home. At the time of the crime, the Gigstad couple was not home. No signs of forced entry were established. Mrs. Gigstad admitted that the spare key to their home was in Brenda Andrews' possession. Another piece of evidence came from Joanna Larson, Pavitt's daughter. On the day of the crime, the girl lent her father her car. He promised to get it repaired. However, when James returned the vehicle, the daughter realized that he did not fix it. In addition, Joanna found a strange find on the car mat, a bullet of .22 caliber. To top it all off, the girl admitted that her father told her to throw it away when she informed him about it. Investigators also discovered that James had purchased a handgun the week before the attack. Consequently, detectives planned to question the sweet couple. The last ride. On November 23rd, Robert Andrews' funeral was held. This crime raised many questions among family and friends. However, even more perplexity arose when Brenda and her children did not appear at the ceremony. Also, James Pavitt did not show up to say goodbye to his friend. No one present knew where they were. This worried not only Robert's relatives, but also the police. It became obvious that the no-shows had gone on the run. Apparently, they guessed that the officers were on the trail of the perpetrators. The suspects were identified. By then, the autopsy results had come back. Brenda's description of the attack differed significantly from the forensic report. As the police had suspected, 2 different weapons were used in the attack. Robert and Brenda were wounded differently than the dead man's wife described. The first shot at the man was indeed fired from a shotgun at long range, but the second came at close range from a .22 caliber pistol. Brenda's arm itself was also shot at close range with the same gun. By analyzing the bloodstains found and their location on the fabric, it was clear that the spouse was in the vicinity of the husband when he was shot. The angle of the blood matches where the shooter was. That is, it was Brenda who fired the second shot at the wounded Robert. After receiving the results of the examination, Brenda and James were officially recognized as suspects and declared wanted. On the run. Unfortunately, the fugitives were days ahead of police. Authorities alerted border officials that the suspects may have crossed the border. However, they were nowhere to be seen. After a while, it became clear that James and Brenda had fled the country. Police speculated that they were in Mexico. To catch the criminals, it was decided to block their accounts. Without their livelihood, they would sooner or later make themselves known.
and so they did. 3 months later, Pavitt contacted his daughter. He asked her to send the money. Only one thing the man didn't take into account. The girl was cooperating with the investigation. Joanna had no doubts about her father's involvement in the crime. He was clearly hiding something from her. Even that time when he asked her boyfriend to call Mr. Andrew, pretending to be a doctor at the local hospital and report his wife's illness. Thanks to James's call, the investigation became aware that the perpetrators were hiding in the city of Cancun. In February 2002, James Pavitt and Brenda Andrew were apprehended at the border and handed over to the U.S. authorities. The two were charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit a felony. Meanwhile, the Andrew couple's children were placed in the care of their paternal grandparents. After their arrest, none of the defendants were willing to cooperate with the investigation. They did not plead guilty, talking in the presence of lawyers. Trials. The first to stand before the court was James. The prosecution carefully built a case. It was reported that in the past Pavitt was an army sniper and knew how to handle firearms. His scandalous affair and attempts to prevent Rob Andrew from stripping Brenda of her beneficiary status were also voiced. His daughter's testimony and the physical evidence that was found were taken into account. The jury found James Pavitt guilty and sentenced him to death. Next to go on trial was Brenda Andrew. While James's trial was methodical, building up into a clear portrait of motives, means, and execution, Brenda's trial was full of sordid details, revelations, and intrigue. The prosecution brought Brenda's personality and her string of infidelities to the forefront. Her former lovers were invited to the hearing. They characterized the woman as a person of far from faith and integrity. When the prosecutor asked Brenda why she killed her husband, she replied, "God knows that in my heart I am pure and innocent. If you are people of faith, set me free." The prosecutor disagreed. He presented her as a lecherous woman who did not love her husband, cheated on him, and then killed him for selfish purposes. To prove his point, he showed the contents of a suitcase she had taken with her to Mexico. It contained lacy lingerie as well as the book 203 Ways to Drive a Man Crazy in Bed. Would a grieving widow run away from her husband's funeral? The prosecutor asked the defendant. In turn, the defense team tried to portray Brenda as a victim of what happened. The defense attorney recalled that she was also injured in the attack. However, forensic experts said that the woman shot herself in the arm, to which the defense said that it possessed a letter with Pavitt's sole confession to the crimes committed. That would seem to be a valid argument. However, the handwriting expertise established that the document was forged by Brenda Andrew herself. However, the most shocking revelation was another. Pavitt's attorney stated that in the event of his ward's death, Brenda became the beneficiary of his insurance policy. In time, apparently, the same fate awaited him as Rob. Or maybe Brenda thought that she would be able to prove her innocence, and the punishment for the crime would fall on the shoulders of her lover. After the latter's death sentence, she'd be entitled to the insurance money too. The jury deliberated for about 6 hours. In the end, Brenda Andrew was found guilty of the crime charged and sentenced to death.
Bottom line, both convicts are on death row awaiting execution. Brenda repeatedly appeals the judgment, but is unsuccessful. Pavitt's execution is scheduled for July 2024. It may be rescheduled again, as it has been done 4 times before. Brenda's execution date has not yet been set. She is the only woman sentenced to capital punishment in Oklahoma. The criminal intent of Brenda and James is horrific in and of itself. However, the fact that these men considered themselves God-fearing, teaching morality to children, further clouds the situation. People who preach things that do not guide their personal lives are unscrupulous and ruthless. You can expect anything from them because they are unfamiliar with moral principles. Did you know that along with criminology, the science of crime, there is also victimology? This is a field of study that is at the intersection of criminology, psychology, and sociology, and deals with the study of crime victims. It turns out that there are certain predispositions of people to have a crime committed against them. These factors include social status, life experiences, and, of course, psychological characteristics. The worse the social conditions of life, the higher the risk of becoming a victim. At the same time, the higher the social status, the greater the chances of encountering fraud, extortion, and kidnapping. As far as personal experience is concerned, it is simple. People who know how to deal with their surroundings, circumstances are safer, unlike others. Personality traits are probably the defining condition in this list. What kind of character a person possesses determines his or her life position and, consequently, victimization. The case that happened in 1995 in New York is about sacrifice and openness to the world, which became fatal for 21-year-old Kimberly Antonakos. The heroine of today's story is a beautiful girl with a good heart who could not have imagined even in a terrible dream what horror life has prepared her. Thomas Antonakos, a successful businessman and a wonderful father, learned about the disappearance of his daughter from her colleagues. The girl's co-workers contacted him when Kimberly failed to show up for work on the first spring day. She was very punctual and was in good standing with management, so her absence was considered a bad sign, and they were right. The assumption that the employee was ill was dispelled. The worried father also said that he had not been able to call Kim since last night and had a premonition of trouble. His girl was always in touch because he made her a rare and expensive gift for those times, a cell phone. But she didn't answer the phone, so the man was forced to contact her friends. However, they did not help him. No one has seen Kimberly since she left the party in the early morning hours of March 1st. The grieving father decided not to wait and went to the police. Only after learning that the young woman was wanted, law enforcement officials suggested waiting at least 24 hours. It is quite possible that she spent the night at someone's house and will soon make herself known. She was already an adult and could do what she wanted. This attitude to the case did not satisfy Thomas, so he organized his own investigation. Remarkably, but the light on the story of Kimberly's disappearance was shed by a psychic. A person with supernatural abilities was approached by the girl's mother. The woman flew from Florida as soon as she learned about what had happened. In despair, on the advice of a friend, she decided to use all possibilities. Psychic at the sight of the photo of Kim reported that she is still alive, but very weak and dehydrated. She also said that the girl was kidnapped by acquaintances and tried to escape more than once. Finally, she added that the deadly danger comes from several people, and the name of one of them begins with the letter J. Apparently, this is the ringleader of the gang. This information was later made public and caused not only a public outcry, but also unavoidable consequences. However, let's start at the beginning. Kimberly was born in 1974 in New York, USA. She was the only child in the family. Despite the fact that the girl grew up in love and affluence, she was not pampered. Her parents came from simple families. Nevertheless, her father Thomas managed to achieve considerable heights. He created his own company, which was engaged in computers. Earned funds, the man was happy to spend on his favorite daughter and her desires. When Kim was a little girl, the couple Antonakos divorced. The child was left to live with his mother. However, this did not weaken the connection between the little girl and her father. He took her on weekends and spent all his free time with her. When Kimberly's mother found a new man and decided to move to Florida, the girl faced a choice: to stay with her mother or with her father. Since she did not want to move and with her dad felt as wonderful as with her mom, the young lady preferred to live in familiar conditions. So Kim began living with her father, with whom she was very close. She grew up a well-mannered and sociable child. Over the years, she became a bright beauty. Her dazzling smile always lifted her spirits, and in general, she was distinguished by a sense of humor and positivity. Since childhood, she was surrounded by care, protected from trouble. Therefore, Kimberly saw only good in all people. Immediate problems bypassed her, in connection with which she was only heard about the dark side of life. Unfortunately, an open and kind soul brings a lot of sorrows to its owner. In 1994, the girl became a student at the College of Staten Island. A little later, she informed her father that she felt old enough to live independently. Undoubtedly, Mr. Antonakos was concerned about her decision, but respected it and decided not to oppose it. Then he promised himself to secure her separate living arrangements as much as possible. Therefore, Thomas purchased a nice apartment for his daughter in an affluent area of the city. He even equipped his daughter's dwelling with an alarm system. Not wanting her to park far from home, the man bought a space in the garage across the street. And to keep her in constant communication, she had a cell phone and a pager. Everything that was up to the father, he did to the highest standard. His concern for Kim's safety had good reason. It had to do with his affluence and the girl's little worldly experience. Kimberly not only did well in school, but also worked part-time. She refused her father's offer to continue the family business because she wanted to find her own way. So Kimberly took a part-time job as an accountant at a successful firm. At this time, she lived an ordinary student life, often entertained, attended parties. Her father repeatedly offered to return, but she refused. Her desire to be independent led to an unexpected denouement. In early 1995, Kimberly sheltered in her home friend Liz Pace and her family. Their apartment was being renovated. Out of the kindness of her heart, Kimberly offered her spacious lodging. The young people had fun. They cooked together and spent evenings together. On one such day, Kimberly and her friend decided to go to a party. The girls put on makeup, did their hair, and picked out suitable outfits, after which they went to the party. According to Liz, they had a good time. They had fun and danced. Afterwards, Kimberly drove them home in her white 1994 Honda Accord. However, she did not go up to the apartment, citing unfinished business. The girls embraced and never saw each other again. The first place Mr. Antonakos went to after the police was the parking lot next to his daughter's house. However, the car was missing from the garage. On the floor near the wall, the man noticed a shiny object. It turned out to be a small gold earring. The father remembered that he had given his daughter similar ones, and just in case he took them with him. Kimberly wasn't in the apartment either. He only came across guests, a friend, her boyfriend Joshua Torres, and their joint 2-year-old child. Thomas was aware of the decision, but was not in favor of it. The tenants were also surprised by the absence of the hostess and worried about her. Joshua reported that he was looking for Kimberly and volunteered to help. Later, Thomas came to the police station again. He stated that his daughter had had an accident, but the officers remained adamant. The unhappy father decided to communicate again with Liz, who was the last person to see Kim. The man showed the found jewelry. The girl confirmed that she had seen those earrings on Kim the night of the disappearance. Next, Mr. Antonakos visited the places where his daughter often went. There he talked to many people but did not learn anything important. Joshua in turn offered to look not only for Kimberly, but also for the car, which was very conspicuous. Then Thomas went to the police for the third time. This time, he was determined. Therefore, he informed the law enforcement officers that he would not go anywhere until they went on a search. One of the detectives responded to the appeal of the agitated father. He said that despite the protocol, he would take up the investigation. The first thing he did was to reconstruct the events of February 28th. Miss Antonakos went to college in the morning, then to work afterward. After working a few hours, she came home. There, together with friends, she had dinner and then attended a party with Liz. Around 4 a.m., the girls arrived home. After that, Jim went to the parking lot. What urgent business she had at such an early time, it was not possible to find out. In the apartment and garage of the missing was searched, but no evidence or traces indicating a struggle were found. No foreign fingerprints were found either. Either someone made an effort to clean them, or the intruder acted with gloves. The car and driver seemed to have vanished without a trace. The only concern was the earring that was found. The girl's bank account was also analyzed. It was found that the last time she used the bank card was the evening before her disappearance. Therefore, the theory of running away from home was ruled out. The detective's theory was that Kimberly had been kidnapped. At this point, other police officers joined the investigation. For lack of other solid leads, law enforcement unofficially adhered to the information that Mrs. Antonakos received from the psychic. By the way, it is not uncommon for authorities to cooperate with people who have psychic abilities. Sometimes such involvement has positive results, but it is simply not publicized en masse. Witness interviews followed. The first people interviewed were Liz and Joshua. officers learned that 65 calls had been made from Kimberly's landline on the morning of March 1st. This surprised detectives. However, Joshua explained that he had been calling all of his friends and acquaintances, hoping to figure out where Kim had gone and why she hadn't spent the night at home. According to him, she was like a little sister to him. Thanks to Liz's testimony, it was possible to determine what clothes Kim was wearing. A portrait was drawn up, which was to be published. A distinctive note on the girl's body were tattoos. One of them was in the form of a scorpion, her zodiac sign. The other was located on the waist and represented an infinity sign in the form of two naked people. In parallel, there was a search for the missing car. Were checked all the scrapped metal collection points, as well as other places where the vehicle could be in order to disassemble for parts or sale. However, there was no positive result. A check of the girl's cell phone was also unsuccessful. Police officers told Thomas that he should have paid attention to the letters and phone calls he was receiving, as his daughter's kidnappers could have contacted him and offered a ransom. However, the Antonacos family remained in limbo until March 4th. Around 2 a.m., emergency services received a report of a fire. A large abandoned house was burning at 86 Woodhaven Avenue in Queens. Several fire crews were involved in putting it out. When the fire was finally extinguished, a charred body was found in the basement of the building. Forensic experts found out that the deceased was a woman of 25 years old. On her head survived a part of black long hair. There were also traces of tape. The poor woman's legs were bound and her hands were tied behind her back. However, the worst part of the story was something else. She was alive at the time of the fire, as evidenced by her smoke-filled lungs. In fact, the young woman was burned alive. Detectives hypothesized that the body found belonged to the missing Kimberly. However, dental records were needed for a full identification. At the same time, the ashes were inspected. The smell of gasoline could also be smelled in the air. It was obvious that the house had been set on fire. Apparently, someone had decided to destroy evidence of a serious crime, and indeed, there were no traces except for the charred body. Examining the charred corpse, the specialists also found tattoos matching the description of the missing woman. The records that came from the dental clinic confirmed the suspicions of the investigation. That's how Kimberly Antonacos' body was found. Later, other circumstances of the case became known. One of the eyewitnesses of the fire reported that he often walked with his dog. However, the pet had been behaving strangely in recent days. It was nervous and barked at the house. It was unclear what could have caused this reaction. After the fire and the discovery of the body, it became clear what so attracted the attention of the dog. The girl tried to free herself and called for help. With its acute hearing, the dog heard the sounds coming from the basement while they were inaccessible to human perception. When the officers questioned the owner, it turned out that he had visited the building more than once in recent days. The fact is that he put the house for sale and monitored its condition, and also picked up the mail and receipts. However, the man did not look into the basement, inspecting the house only from the outside. As the homeowner admitted, he never heard the suspicious noise, otherwise he would have paid attention to it. The man was clearly shocked by what happened. The investigators decided to question Joshua again, something they didn't like about the guy. In addition, by a strange coincidence, his name began with the letter J. This time, Joshua talked about the guy he hadn't reached the day Kimberly disappeared. It was a young man nicknamed Psycho, a Russian national who had once dated Kimberly. Detectives decided to verify the information. They determined that the Russian had moved to the United States with his parents as a young child. Having grown up, he became a member of a gang and repeatedly broke the law. So, in the case appeared the first suspect, who was soon detained. During the interrogation, Psycho became aware of the death of a former lover. However, his reaction shocked the detectives. The young man did not just claim that he was not involved in the crime. He was heartbroken. It was clear that he was experiencing genuine emotions. Investigators also wanted to see how he would behave at a crime scene, so they took him to the scene of the tragedy. There, everyone was convinced that they had the wrong man in custody. In addition, after some time, the guy's alibi was confirmed. Once again, the investigation was deadlocked. The victim's family decided to turn to the psychic once again. This time, the psychic said that she saw 4 people involved in the crime. She also said that the kidnappers wanted to establish contact, but they failed to do so. Allegedly, the kidnapping itself did not initially suggest a sad ending. "The denouement is coming soon," the fortune teller summarized. A couple days later, hoping to get some information, the missing woman's father announced a $10,000 reward to anyone who would help catch the culprit. Mr. Antonakos could not forget the words spoken by the clairvoyant. If he had been told earlier that he would rely on some fortune tellers and soothsayers, he would never have believed it. But grief makes a man suggestible. The man went over in his mind her words about her daughter's kidnappers wanting to get in touch. What did that mean, and what prevented them? Then he returned home and sat down at the table. He stared at his phone for a long time as he suddenly remembered a minor point. On the day Kimberly disappeared, he had listened to all the answering machine recordings, as he had been expecting his girl to contact him. However, there had been no voicemails, except perhaps 2 blank ones. When he turned them on, he heard nothing. There was dead silence on the other end of the handset, so he mistook them for some sort of device malfunction or communication problems. However, it later turned out that this was not the case. 5 days after the girl's body was discovered, officers managed to locate her car. It was parked in a fairly quiet area of town, not far from the crime scene. The investigation hoped to find fingerprints in the car. However, the vehicle was well washed. The only evidence was Kimberly's hair and the second earring in the passenger compartment. It seemed like a breakthrough in the investigation, but it did not happen. At the same time, Kimberly's father was being implicated in a local mob hit. Allegedly, such a rich and successful man was clearly connected with the criminal world. Some of the man's entourage even blamed him for the death of his daughter, as if his dark deeds had brought trouble on his daughter. The grief-stricken father denied any involvement. Detectives, through their own channels, managed to verify the information floating around. It was not confirmed. Thomas was clean and conducted his business openly. In July 1995, a young man was arrested by the police in a New York City home for burglary. Unexpectedly, he provided information concerning the case of Miss Antonakos. The detainee claimed that he had heard from an acquaintance that his friends had kidnapped and then burned the girl. When the officers heard the name of the unidentified man, the picture of the crime finally emerged. It was none other than Joshua Torres, the same guy who lived in Kimberly's apartment and helped in the search for her. Detectives decided to take a closer look at him. The young man was called back in for questioning. He denied any involvement in the crime. However, during a long conversation, he gave himself away. Torres said that if he had been the kidnapper, he would have fed Kim. Detectives latched onto that line because there was no coverage of the victim dying of hunger, thirst, or cold. No one outside the investigation knew that, not even her father. However, they needed more evidence, and it didn't take them long. Officers looked into the identity of the new suspect. It was found that the guy had a criminal record and was repeatedly attracted. In addition, he did not work anywhere and lived at the expense of his roommate Liz. While the girl worked, he took care of the child. Having free time allowed him to plan the crime in peace. He knew Kimberly's routine, could track her down and hide her in an abandoned house. Then why didn't he demand a ransom? Something must have gone wrong, so the unsub got rid of Kim. The calls Torres made that morning were analyzed. It became obvious that the guy was lying when he said he was calling Kimberly's contacts. Most of the numbers belonged to random people with no connection to Kimberly. After examining his pager data, it was discovered that the guy had sent some strange messages on March 1st. The ring around Joshua was gradually closing. He had been suspicious to detectives for a long time. Finally, they got solid leads to apprehend him. They admitted to him that they no longer considered Kimberly's ex-boyfriend a suspect. And once again, they pressed the case intelligently. That's when Torres said he suspected his friends of massacring the girl. He pleaded guilty to accessory to kidnapping. At the same time, he said that he did not think that his comrades would eventually decide to get rid of a common friend. According to him, they just wanted to get the ransom and then let the victim go. But the plan didn't work. The kidnappers wondered why their calls went ignored by Mr. Antonakos. It turns out that they did make contact with Kimberly's father and even recorded a message to ransom her. However, the recording of the conversation was not saved on the answering machine for some reason. The kidnappers were angered by the father's inaction and decided to wait for further developments in the case. It turns out that they were frightened not only by the publicity, but also by the words of the clairvoyant that the suspect's name begins with the letter J. This information was not only published in the media, but also broadcast on TV with reference to an additional unofficial source of information. It's a mystical, vicious circle. One action spawned another. After speaking with the police, Joshua was released on bail and then disappeared. At the same time, his accomplice Jose was shot in the back of the head while walking with his wife. His wife later admitted to investigators that her husband did not trust Joshua, used a tape recorder when talking to him, and wanted to expose him. She claimed he felt guilty about kidnapping Kimberly, but he didn't set the house on fire, and soon wanted to confess everything to the police as he had confessed to her. Thanks to the pager messages and the suspect's statements, investigators established the details of the kidnapping and the crime. Thus it was found that 4 men were involved: Joshua Torres, Julio Negron, Jose Negron, Julio's namesake, and Nicholas Brett, nicknamed Jay. Notably, Julio dated Kimberly for a while and even wanted to marry her, but she rejected his proposal. The young people were united by the fact that they were friends and had a criminal past behind them. However, it did not compare to what the guys did to the poor girl. Nicholas had been released on bail shortly before the kidnapping. Thanks to his mother, he got off with a small fine for a crime that could have sentenced him to more than a year in prison. As for Joshua, at a young age, he was involved in cases of child abduction, violence against a minor, illegal carrying of weapons. However, he too was limited to a light sentence for the acts committed. The initiator of the crime was undoubtedly him. It was Joshua who coordinated the group's actions. After Kimberly returned from the party, the men grabbed her in the parking lot. Apparently, they'd been following her and waiting for the perfect moment to leave her alone. A gun was used for intimidation. Kim resisted, so her hands were tied and her mouth, eyes, and even ears were covered with duct tape. After that, the bandits put the girl in the trunk and drove her to an abandoned house. There, they took the unfortunate woman to the basement and tied her to a chair. They even removed her shoes so that she would not attract attention to herself by tapping her feet. Before this, the young men told Kimberly that her father owed money and they would release her after he had paid them. Julio was supposed to look after the girl, bring her food and water twice a day, and make sure she was warm. However, he was afraid of the consequences and left the house. As it happened, the victim did not eat or drink for 3 days, and also froze from the cold. As soon as the abductee was left alone, the perpetrators informed Joshua. He made an audio recording in which he demanded $75,000 as ransom. Then the guy called the girl's father and left 2 messages, which later turned out to be empty, so they were not taken into account by Mr. Antimacos. The kidnappers waited for news and sincerely did not understand why Kim's father did not get in touch with them. During this time, Kimberly, left unattended, passed out from dehydration more than once, but she was still fighting for life. The intruders were angry that they had not received the ransom, and they were afraid of being caught, so they decided to let her go. When they went down to the basement, they found the girl unconscious. Deciding that Kimberly was dead, they thought of nothing better than to get rid of all the evidence, and at the same time of the hostage. In talking to Liz, the officers discovered that Joshua had used his roommate as an alibi. He directed the actions of the accomplices while in the house with the child. Liz claimed that at first she did not even realize that her boyfriend had kidnapped Kimberly. Later at trial, Liz testified against him. She said that after the interrogation, Joshua came to her and confessed to everything. After that, he beat her and silenced her, threatened to kill her, and soon went on the run. Sometime later, the perpetrator was arrested. He was also suspected of killing Jose, however, there was no direct evidence of this. Investigators decided to confront the former friends. They informed them that Joshua denied his involvement in the massacre. When Julio learned about it, he cooperated with the investigation and told everything. This allowed Torres to be convicted of Kimberly's murder. As a result, the trio was charged with murder,
arson, kidnapping, and holding a person against his will. During the trial, it was found that Joshua had repeatedly tried to mislead the investigation and avoid punishment. The jury deliberated for about 10 hours. In the end, Joshua Torres was sentenced to 58 years in prison. Nicholas Brett received the same sentence. Julio Negron was only found guilty of accessory after the fact. As such, he was sentenced to between 2 and 6 years in prison. Tomas Antonakos was satisfied with the verdict of the court. He did not want the criminals to be sentenced to death. In his opinion, it would have been the lightest punishment. It is known that Nicholas was repeatedly abused and assaulted in prison, and after 2 years in prison, he died of AIDS. Julio was released after 2 years, having served his sentence. Joshua will not be released until 2053 at the earliest, if he lives to see it. Sadly, in 2005, the victim's father died of cancer. His family is sure that the disease provoked the terrible death of his daughter. This is how unexpectedly cut short the life of a beautiful girl, Kimberly Antonakos. Whether excessive good-naturedness the cause of her premature departure, it is difficult to judge. However, if she had been more prudent and choosy in her surroundings, perhaps she would have lived a long and happy life. Good always triumphs over evil, even in a case like this. The trial that took place and life afterward set things right. The perpetrators of the tragedy are severely punished and are unlikely to ever forget what they have done.